Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M. I hope you're doing well and ready for another video. Before we begin, if you enjoy these stories, please give the video a like. And if you've ever had something strange or unexplained happen to you, feel free to send it to me. Tonight's first story starts in a very normal way, with someone reading in bed late at night, until they hear a sound that seems to come from inside the room. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's start with the first story. I hope you all have a good night's sleep. I was probably 16, maybe just shy of 17, and I remember lying in bed way later than I should have been. I'd been reading this paperback I was completely hooked on. I couldn't tell you the title now, but I remember that feeling of trying to squeeze in just one more chapter before finally giving up for the night. So I closed the book, set it on the little table beside my bed, and just as I was getting settled, I heard this sound. It was loud. Not just house-settling loud, not a creak, not the mattress springs, not the walls popping because of the weather. It was this deep, ugly mix between a growl and a belch. Long, wet, rough, and way too close. And I mean close. It sounded like it came from inside my room. I froze completely. I don't think I even blinked. My whole body went still in that way it does when your brain is trying to decide whether you're in danger, but it doesn't have enough information yet. I just lay there, listening. Part of me was waiting for someone to crawl out from under the bed, or step out of the closet, or breathe again. Anything that would explain it. But there was nothing. After a few minutes, I got brave enough to move, though honestly, brave is generous. I slowly stood up on the mattress and backed toward the wall, because my bed was pushed against it. In my terrified teenage logic, I figured if something was under the bed, it would have a harder time grabbing me from there. So I stood there, on my bed, pressed against the wall, barely breathing. I stayed like that for a ridiculous amount of time, at least half an hour, maybe longer. No scratching, no footsteps, no whispering, no second sound. Eventually, I knew I couldn't stay there forever, so I did the only thing my panic-struck brain could come up with. I ran from the head of the bed, launched myself as far toward the door as I could, hit the floor hard, slammed my knees, and knocked my head against the wall. I didn't feel any of it. I bolted straight out of my room, tore through the hallway, and ran into my parents' bedroom. I woke my mom up and told her there was someone in my room. She grabbed a baseball bat and the cordless phone, which, for anyone too young to remember, was basically a housebound cell phone with an antenna that could absolutely become a weapon if the situation called for it. She turned on every light, marched into my room, and yelled that she was calling the police, and whoever was hiding had better come out right now. Nobody did. She checked under the bed. She opened the closet. She looked behind the door, around the furniture, everywhere. Nothing. Then she looked at me with that tired parent face. The one that says, "I love you, but are you sure you didn't just scare yourself half to death?" And I kept telling her, yes. I heard it. I know I heard it. She told me I was getting too old to be afraid of monsters under the bed, turned off the light, and went back to sleep. The second she left, I turned the light right back on. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner of my bed with my knees pulled up to my chest, listening. Just waiting for that sound to happen again. But it never did. And listen, I know how this sounds. I know people will say I was half asleep or dreaming or imagining things. I wasn't. I was wide awake. I had just put my book down. I know the difference between an old house noise and something alive making a sound in the room with you. I've never heard anything like it before, and I've never heard anything like it since. And that's the part that stays with you. When you hear something in a place where it absolutely should not be, something that feels like it doesn't belong in the world you understand, it leaves a mark. You don't forget a sound like that. I remember something that might have been from a past life, but today I want to tell you about my son. I shared this story once before, years ago, under another account, so it may sound familiar to a few people. But it has stayed with me all this time. When my son was 3, I had to spend a few days in the hospital. My husband wanted to cheer him up and do something special, so he took him on one of those short sightseeing flights over the city. It was a small plane, maybe 3 or 4 seats, and back then you could pay a little money to go up for half an hour and see everything from the air. Our little boy was not the kind of child who cried easily, so when he suddenly broke down because he was told he could not sit in the pilot's seat, it startled everyone. And I do not mean a little fussing. I mean deep, aching sobs, like something inside him had cracked open. He asked why he was not allowed to fly the plane. My husband gently told him, "Because you're too little, buddy. Your feet can't reach the pedals yet." And then my son said, "So it's not because I was bad last time? When I crashed and all those people died?" Well, as you can imagine, that stopped everyone cold. The pilot heard it too, and he looked just as unsettled as my husband felt. My husband asked him what he meant, because we had never flown anywhere with him before. And my son said, very plainly, "I was a pilot when I was big before." So my husband asked, "When were you big before?" And my son answered, "Before I was here. I was big like you. I flew a plane, and I made it crash, and everyone died. Then I came here." The pilot needed a moment after that. Honestly, I think anyone would have. He even decided to do another walk-around inspection of the plane because the whole thing had rattled him. My husband got our son settled into the back seat and told him not to touch anything. Then he stepped aside to speak with the pilot and explain that this had never happened before, that our son had never been in a plane, and that he had no idea where any of this was coming from. Then they heard my son crying again. This time, he was upset because he wanted to call the tower, but he had been told not to touch the radio. He could not have reached it anyway, but he was so distressed by it. The pilot, to his credit, was very kind. He plugged in a headset and let my son wear it so he could hear the tower. His microphone was off, of course, so he could not actually transmit anything. Then my husband and the pilot climbed into the front seats. The pilot started going through his checks, and my son, sitting in the back, began quietly repeating them. Not randomly either. He was echoing the checks in a way that made it seem like he knew what was supposed to happen next. At one point, the pilot skipped saying one of the checks out loud, and my son said it for him. None, when the pilot spoke to the tower, my son tried to do the same into his inactive microphone. According to my husband, he used the kind of phrasing and order that pilots use. I do not know aviation language, so I cannot explain it properly, but my husband said the pilot went pale all over again. After that, the flight itself was calm. They both enjoyed it. But when they came to see me in the hospital later, the very first thing my son said was, "Nobody is mad at me about the crash anymore." I had no idea what he was talking about. He seemed relieved, almost glowing with it. My husband explained the whole thing to me later, during another visit, and I remember just sitting there trying to take it in, and that would have been strange enough on its own. But 3 years later, when our family went to an aircraft museum, it happened again. By then, my son was 6. The museum had an old World War II aircraft being restored. I believe it was a Mosquito, though I could be remembering that part imperfectly. Someone working on it offered to take us inside, and my son was thrilled. But once we got inside, his excitement changed. He started looking around and pointing out things that were not right. He mentioned several details, and every single one of them turned out to be something modern that had been added later, something waiting to be replaced with an original part. or something original that had been moved from where it should have been. The mechanic was stunned. He said something like, "You must be real aircraft people at home." But we are not. My husband likes small planes, but he is not a warplane enthusiast. I have no special interest in planes at all. I suggested maybe our son had seen a book at his grandparents' house or something like that. But my son said, "No. I know because I trained on one of these when I was big before." We had not talked to him about the first incident since it happened. We honestly thought he had forgotten all about being big before. My husband asked him gently, "Was this the kind of plane you were flying before you came to live with us?" And my son said no. He said the plane he crashed was wooden and it could land on water. He said he had made a bad mistake while flying it, and people died because of him. He became so sad as he said it. That heavy kind of sadness no little child should be able to carry. So we told him again that he was here now, that he got to start over, and that no one was mad at him. That seemed to help. He calmed down after that. Meanwhile, the mechanic looked completely bewildered, so I took the kids to another part of the museum while my husband explained what had happened 3 years earlier. Nothing strange like that has happened since. When I told the story online years ago, some people reached out and tried to connect the details. They told me about World War II planes that were wooden and could land on water. I think one of them may have said it sounded like a Catalina, though I could have that wrong. They even found a wartime crash that had been ruled pilot error and traced the pilot to South Africa, training in the UK when the accident happened. I cannot say what any of it truly means. My son never developed a special interest in South Africa, or the UK, or World War II. He is not obsessed with airplanes. He likes things like Gundam and Lego. His work has nothing to do with aviation or travel. So if reincarnation is the explanation, it did not take over his life. It was more like a small door opened when he was little, just long enough for us to hear something from behind it. And then, quietly, it closed. You know, the way it sounded on that camera really stuck with me. It almost sounded like someone was saying, "Mommy missed you," but stretched out in this strange, creepy voice. And I know you're pretty sure you didn't say it yourself and just forget about it, so I keep trying to make sense of it in a normal way first. Part of me wonders if it could have been some kind of audio glitch. Maybe the recording buffered wrong, or the sound slowed down for a second and made a regular voice come out warped and unsettling. That kind of thing can happen, and it would explain why it sounded so off. The hacking idea feels a little far-fetched to me, but I guess it's not impossible. What makes it creepy is thinking, what if some stranger had been watching the camera long enough to know your routine? Maybe they knew when you usually came home, knew you greeted the dog, and in their weird little mind, they decided to talk to him like they belonged there. Honestly, that idea bothers me more than the ghost explanation. A spirit saying something strange is one thing. Some random person watching your house and talking to Milo through the camera is a whole different level of disturbing. Do you have any cameras pointed toward the driveway or the front of the house? Because if someone did have access, they might have been able to see when you pulled up. Then they would know you were about to walk in and greet the dog. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just trying to understand why a person would say something like that at that exact moment. And no, you don't need to send me the ball video for me to believe you. I'll take your word for it. I've had a few things happen in my own life that I still can't explain, things I saw and heard myself. So I'm not someone who automatically dismisses everything. I do try to look for the logical explanation first, though, because most of the time there is one hiding somewhere. Still, if I had to choose between a hacker and a ghost, I think I'd rather it be a ghost. That probably sounds strange, but I mean it. The idea of some weirdo watching me and talking to my dog about how much I love him feels way creepier than some harmless spirit passing through. I've had a few experiences that felt haunted, and I never got hurt. People I trust have told me similar stories, and they were fine too. The ball rolling doesn't surprise me too much, because something kind of similar happened to me not long ago. I didn't see it happen, but I heard it. Something flew off the wall from a secured hook, and there was really no way it should have fallen on its own. The hook was still firmly in place. For that object to come off, it would have had to lift up, curl around the hook, and then somehow land about 5 feet away from where it should have dropped. I was sitting in the other room, heard it hit hard, and went to look right away. What made it even stranger is that 3 family members had passed away in that house. I don't know why any of them would want to bother me, but still, it made the whole thing feel heavier. Another time, I saw what looked like the shadow of a cat moving across my bedroom wall. I caught it out of the corner of my eye, then turned and watched it move toward the dark closet. It kind of shrank into the darkness and disappeared. At first, I assumed it was my cat's shadow, but my bedroom door was shut. I searched the room right after, and there was no cat in there. There weren't many places for him to hide either. The closet door was only cracked a tiny bit, not enough for him to slip in unnoticed. I left the room slowly, staring down at my feet to make sure he didn't rush past me, even though he didn't usually do that. Then I closed the door behind me and found him lying somewhere else completely. That one still feels unexplained to me. I tested the lighting afterward, checked every angle where a shadow could have come from, and it just didn't make sense. It was nighttime. I had blackout curtains, and the only light in the room was from the TV. So yes, I do believe there can be something paranormal out there, whatever people want to call it. I just think it's rare. Most of the time, probably 9 times out of 10, there's a normal explanation if you look hard enough. But if you can post the video of the ball rolling without too much hassle, I'll definitely watch it. I'm not really sure how easy that is on Reddit, whether you can send it in a message or if you'd have to make another post. I don't really DM people there much, so I'm not the best person to ask on that part. Still, if you're able to share it, I'd be interested to see it. I've come to feel, after losing my grandparents and then my mother, that time may not be the solid wall we think it is, not in the way it feels to us while we're living inside it, anyway. After my mother died, I came home exhausted from planning her service and trying to hold myself together. My little boy, Caleb, was confused and heartbroken. He kept asking what had happened to his grandma. I didn't tell him she had become an angel in the clouds. I didn't dress death up as something soft and simple. And I definitely didn't tell him that being present for dying is anything other than one of the hardest things a person can ever witness. But I did tell him this. I told him that the love people give us while they're alive is a kind of energy. And energy doesn't just vanish. It doesn't blink out of the universe because a body stops breathing. It changes form. That's physics, really. Energy is not created or destroyed. It becomes something else. And that idea gave me something to hold on to after my mother died. I told him that the love my mother had for me and the love she had for him no longer existed in the same way it did when she was alive. That part was true. We couldn't call her. We couldn't hug her. She wouldn't be sitting at the table with us again. But that love was not gone. It was still around us. It was in the way I comforted him. It was in the stories I would tell. It was in the softness she had left in me, the patience she had taught me, the memories that would keep rising up when we needed them. And I told him that when people talk about heaven, maybe that's part of what they mean. Maybe heaven isn't some faraway place with gates and clouds. Maybe it's the love that remains around us, changed but still real, not visible in the old way, but present all the same. I told him that maybe the people we lose can see us, and maybe they can't. I don't know. None of us really knows. But I could tell him with complete certainty that his grandmother's love would stay with us for the rest of our lives. Not as a pretty saying, not as something we say just to feel better, as something true. There are harder parts of death too, of course. Parts that aren't gentle or beautiful. But that wasn't something I needed to put on the shoulders of a small child. I've also learned that people who work in hospice see certain things often enough that they're trained for them. Dying people will sometimes talk about relatives who died years before. Parents, spouses, friends, even pets. They'll say someone has come to visit. They'll talk about getting ready for a trip. Sometimes they wake from a nap and say they have tickets, or that someone is waiting for them. I'm not claiming to understand what that means. I don't pretend to have special knowledge about what happens at the end. But it happens often enough that hospice workers know not to panic when they hear it, and they know how to help families understand it without fear. Years ago, someone I had once loved died alone and much too young. His mother was nearly destroyed by the thought of that. And as a mother, I understood. No matter how old your child becomes, some part of your heart still holds them as the baby you first loved. She only found a little peace after a dear friend sat with her and said, with deep conviction, "None of us dies alone. None of us. Ever." For them, there was a religious meaning around that. For me, the religion wasn't the important part. What mattered was that her friend spoke from experience, from something she had witnessed and carried. And his mother believed her. It gave her peace. And honestly, I believe the people he had been aching for found him in whatever way he needed. When my own mother was dying, she spoke sometimes to her grandmother, who had been her favorite person when she was growing up. I didn't correct her. I didn't pull her back into our version of reality. I honored it. There were moments when she would look just past my shoulder, then back at me, with this expression I knew so well. It was the look she had when she was thinking carefully about whether to say something. It wasn't exactly peaceful. It wasn't joyful either. It was thoughtful, measuring. A mother's look. I knew it because I had seen it all my life. And I can tell you this much. There was something very real in that room. Whether it was memory, chemistry, spirit, love, or some doorway we don't have language for, I don't know. But it mattered. I'm so sorry for the loss of your sweet baby. Truly. There are no tidy words for that kind of grief. Baby loss is its own country, and no one should have to learn its roads. I once heard someone say there are always 3 generations with us: those living in front of us, those who have died, and those who have not yet been born. That thought has stayed with me. I don't need to know everything beyond that. I don't need to argue about psychics or angels or signs. Those things may bring comfort to some people, and that's fine. But for me, the center of it is simpler. There are the ones who came before us. There are the ones here now. There are the ones still coming. And maybe your baby belongs, painfully and tenderly, to more than one of those places. Maybe one day, when your own journey comes, you will meet again in whatever form love takes next. Maybe none of us can say for sure. I'm not an authority on any of this. I would never want to press a belief into someone else's grief. But I do hope, with my whole heart, that peace finds you somehow. Not all at once, not perfectly, just gently, when it can. Because love does not leave the universe. It changes shape. And sometimes, somehow, it still surrounds us. I was 17 when my family moved into this old double-wide trailer on our school and church campus. Everybody called it the Harbor House because it was where visiting missionaries usually stayed when they came through town. Our new place was still being built, and construction was dragging on forever, so the church let us stay there for a while. My dad and I helped with the grounds around campus, mowing, planting, all that. So people were happy to help us out. At first, I thought it was just an uncomfortable place. Drafty. Too quiet in a way that felt heavy. My room had these two big windows that seemed to collect the cold and pour it straight into the floor. One morning before school, I was standing in the corner of my room with my arms tucked inside my shirt, trying to warm up before I changed clothes. And then somebody shoved me. Not a little bump, a hard push. I stumbled forward, and I was instantly furious because I thought my sister had come into my room again. I spun around, ready to yell at her, but the room was empty. The door was closed. I told my mom right away. She looked at me and said, "Why were you changing by the windows?" Then she suggested maybe I had stood up too fast. Maybe my blood pressure dropped. Maybe I just lost my balance. So that was that. Case closed, apparently. A week or so later, I was cleaning my room and tossed a burgundy polo onto the shelves in the back of my closet. I walked across the room to my nightstand, grabbed something, turned back around, and that shirt was lying right at my feet. Again, my mom brushed it off. She acted like I was being spacey or dramatic, which honestly made it worse. Because the little things weren't little when you were the one alone in that room. And those were the mild things. At night, I'd smell cigar smoke in my room when nobody in our family smoked. I'd hear scratching above me, like fingernails or claws dragging lightly across the ceiling. Sometimes there were voices too, low and muffled, right over my head while I was trying to sleep. Everyone thought I was losing it. My sister told people at school that I thought the Harbor House was haunted, and it turned into this running joke. My parents got tired of me waking them up. They decided I was either looking for attention, too imaginative, or some lovely combination of both. Then things started happening to them. Small things went missing. Doors would knock when nobody was outside them. The whole place had this thick, miserable feeling in it, like the air itself didn't want you there. The worst night, though, was when my sisters, my best friend, and I were in the living room watching a musical. My youngest sister and I were on one couch. My best friend was in an armchair nearby. My other sister was lying on the couch across from us, facing the television. We were joking around, being silly, singing along a little, when my best friend looked over at the piano. My mom had this odd little porcelain doll sitting there in a tiny chair. It had one of those delicate painted faces that was probably supposed to be charming, but honestly, it looked like it knew things. My best friend said something like, "Why does your mom even like stuff like that?" My youngest sister and I laughed and agreed it was creepy, but that was just Mom. And I need you to understand this part. The three of us were looking directly at the doll. My other sister wasn't. She was lying down facing the other way. That doll turned its head. It turned. All three of us screamed and jumped up at the same time. My youngest sister started crying. My best friend kept yelling, "No, no, absolutely not." And I remember shouting, "I told you, I told you, I told you." My other sister, of course, said we were being ridiculous because she hadn't seen it. But after that, my mom finally believed I hadn't been making it up. She went to our pastor, but our church wasn't exactly the kind where people knew what to do with something like that. So she found a Pentecostal pastor instead, and he came to the double wide and prayed through every room, every hallway, every corner. Things did calm down after that. Eventually, our house was finished, 5 months late, and we moved out. For a few weeks, I thought it was over. Then, slowly, things started happening again in the new house. Not as violently as before, but enough that I knew whatever it was had not stayed behind completely. The part that still hurts is that my mom went right back to doubting me. She'd laugh and say, "Here we go again." Like the paranormal was something you caught once and then became immune to, like chickenpox. But I know what happened. There were darker things over the next couple of years, things I still don't really like talking about. Eventually, when I was 19, I got so tired and angry and scared that I decided I was done letting it have power over me. I don't know how else to explain it except that I pushed back with everything in me. And it worked. But afterward, I was sick for a while, like it had taken something out of me. Sometimes I wonder if it started as poltergeist activity, maybe tied to me being that age and under so much stress. Maybe something else noticed and attached itself. I don't know. I really don't. What I do know is that I still won't go back into that double wide. More than 20 years later, just thinking about standing inside it makes my chest tighten. And every once in a while, very quietly, I'll ask my youngest sister, "You saw the doll move too, right?" She always nods. Then she changes the subject. You know, I've said this for years, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. If someone ever wanted real proof that something paranormal exists, I'd tell them to spend one night in my late grandparents' old house. My Uncle Darren owns it now, but when I was little, that house belonged to my grandparents. And even as a kid, before anyone had ever explained ghosts or hauntings to me, I knew there was something wrong there. It was always the back foyer that got to me, that little area with the staircase leading up to the second floor. I hated it. I mean, I truly hated it. Every time I had to walk past it, I'd get this awful feeling that something was watching me from the top of the stairs. Not just watching either, staring. It felt heavy, angry almost, like every instinct in my body was begging me to get away from there. My skin would prickle, my stomach would drop, and I'd feel this pressure in the air that I still don't know how to explain. And for some reason, I always felt like it was a man. Nobody told me that. Nobody planted the idea in my head. I was too young to even understand what a haunting was supposed to feel like. I just knew that whatever was there felt male, and it did not feel kind. The worst nights were the ones when I had to sleep upstairs. There was a little bed set up in the room just outside my grandparents' bedroom, and I dreaded sleeping there. I'd lie under the covers, trying not to move, and sooner or later, I'd hear it. Footsteps. Slow ones. That old house had wooden floors, so every step made a sound. Creak, pause. Creak, pause. You could tell exactly where it was in the hallway. It would walk slowly down the hall, like it wasn't in any hurry at all. Then it would stop, right beside the bed, and it would just stand there. I can still remember the feeling. It was like something huge was pressing down on my chest. I'd be lying there under the blankets, terrified to even breathe, because I didn't want it to know I was awake. My cousin was there with me sometimes, and she was just as scared. Neither of us wanted to move. Neither of us wanted to look. After a while, it would finally turn around and walk back down the hallway, one slow creak at a time. It happened in the spare bedroom, too. Same thing. The pacing. The stopping outside the door. That horrible feeling that something was standing there, listening. My grandfather had his own experience once, and this one still makes me uneasy. He woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the toilet flushing. He was the only person home, so he thought someone had broken in. He grabbed his firearm and went to check. When he got to the bathroom, the toilet was still running, so he knew he hadn't imagined it. Then he saw what looked like a woman in white. He searched the whole house after that. Doors, windows, rooms, everything. Nothing was open. Nobody was there. And yet, that toilet had flushed. That house always had noises too. If you were sitting downstairs in the living room, you could hear something walking around overhead. Not little settling sounds, actual footsteps. Later on, when my brother moved back into the house for a while as an adult, things got even stranger. He'd come home from work and find himself locked out of his upstairs bedroom, even though nobody else had been up there. He hated sleeping with the closet door open, so he always made sure to shut it before bed. But sometime during the night, it would open again. When he was younger, the power used to go out around the same time every morning, right when he was getting ready for school. He also remembered smelling rotten eggs near the front door, which made the whole thing feel even more wrong. One night, while he was sleeping, the curtain rod and curtains somehow came up and over the wall brackets and fell right onto him. Another time, a stack of paper plates flew off the top of the refrigerator like someone had slapped them across the room. My grandmother usually brushed it all off. She didn't like talking about it. If we said there was something in the house, she'd wave it away like we were being dramatic. But even she went quiet after some of those things happened. After my grandparents passed, I stopped going over there. Years went by, and I always wondered if the activity had faded or if maybe the house had gone quiet. Recently, I found out it definitely has not. My Aunt Mira went over to visit my uncle, and while she was sitting in the living room, the stereo behind her suddenly turned on by itself. Not softly either. It blasted so loud that she jumped out of her seat. And then she felt something touching the back of her head, like fingers messing with her hair. My uncle barely reacted. He just kind of shrugged, like it was another normal day in that house. That's what bothers me most, honestly. He's used to it. My aunt refuses to go upstairs alone now, but she won't say exactly why. And I don't push her, because I think I already know. Some houses hold memories. That one holds something else. I honestly can't remember exactly how much longer we stayed after that, or whether anything else happened that same night. But I do remember this clearly. We went back to that old church several times, probably 3 or 4 visits in all. And every single time, something happened. When you first walked in, you stepped into this small foyer. The bell tower was off to the left. Years before, that area had been wide open, with a ladder going straight up into the tower. But by the time we were going there, it had been changed. There was a little storage closet on the left where they kept yard tools, and a ceiling had been put in above it. So to get to the bell tower, you had to climb a short ladder through an opening in the ceiling, then cross over above the closet to reach the bell. I always assumed they changed it for safety, maybe after something happened there, but I don't know that for sure. On another night, we were all spread out in the main room of the church, sitting quietly in different pews, just listening. After a while, I started hearing these soft rustling sounds and little bumps coming from the foyer. I asked everyone if we could move up front by the altar, just to make sure none of us were accidentally causing it. So we all gathered together near the front. The sounds kept going, and we had already checked that closet when we first came in. There were no animals inside, and honestly, no real way for anything to get in. The door itself was hard to open because the frame had shifted over time. You had to pull it with some force before it would finally pop loose. And when it swung open, it made this long, loud, creaking sound. The only entrance into the church was the front doors, and those stayed closed the whole time. That night, the moon was really bright. Even inside the church, you could still see toward the back. Not clearly, but enough. The moonlight was coming through the windows and laying across the room in these pale strips. Then, all of us heard it. The closet door popped open. Then it creaked, slowly, as if someone was pulling it open just halfway. After that, we heard footsteps. They came out from the closet and started moving toward us. Slow steps at first. Quiet, but clear. They moved maybe 5 or 6 feet across the foyer, and then we heard the sound change when they stepped up into the main church room. That part stood out because the foyer floor was wood, but the church floor had linoleum, and there was one small step between them. Right when the footsteps reached that point, someone in our group gasped. And the second they did, those quiet footsteps turned loud, heavy, fast. It sounded like someone running back across the foyer. Then the closet door slammed shut so hard it echoed through the whole church. That was the first time we had ever seen and heard something physically move in that place. We saw the door open in the moonlight. We heard the pop when it came loose, the creak as it swung open, the footsteps coming closer, then the louder, pounding steps running away. And then, that final slam. I still think about the difference in those footsteps. Coming toward us, they were faint and careful. Going back, they were panicked and heavy. As for what happened to the child people talked about, I don't know. For all I know, maybe they're still there. I haven't been back in years. For a while, the church was left unlocked, and people were allowed to go inside. But then some teenagers started using it as a place to drink, and they damaged parts of the building and the cemetery around it. After that, they kept the gate locked whenever the church wasn't being used. So, I don't know that I would call this story crazy exactly. Honestly, I think experiences like this are probably more normal than we admit. We don't really know what happens after we die. None of us get the full answer until we get there ourselves. Last year, my family lost 2 people. I wasn't extremely close with either of them, but their deaths still hit me because I could see how deeply they hurt the people I love. I live with my grandmother, and both of them were connected to her in a really important way. One was her oldest son, Evan, and the other was her second husband, Rory. After my Uncle Evan passed, something strange happened a couple of times before bed. We'd be settling in for the night, and the kitchen light would suddenly turn on by itself. It wasn't one of those touch lights or anything automatic. It was a regular flip switch. My grandmother called out to me and said, "Jame, did you just go into the kitchen? Did you turn that light on?" And I said, "No, I'm in my room." She said, "Well, the light just came on by itself." And honestly, I wasn't scared. I felt kind of comforted. I just said, "Hello? Aw, maybe that's Evan stopping by to see us." A little while after that, we brought one of his paintings home and hung it in the hallway. After that, the kitchen light stopped turning on. Then, after Rory passed, we started noticing something else. The shed in the backyard kept opening. Not just a little crack either. It would be standing open, day after day, for about a week or 2. Nothing inside was moved. Nothing was missing. It was just open. My grandmother would ask me, "Did you open the shed today?" And I'd tell her, "No, I didn't." The odd thing was, we barely ever went in there. It still had some of Rory's things inside too, and that shed wasn't easy to open. The door was heavy, there wasn't a window in there for wind to push through, and we usually kept a loose lock sitting through the handles. This all started after we cleaned out the garage and packed up the rest of his belongings. It was one of those bittersweet chores where you feel like you're doing what needs to be done, but every object feels like it has a heartbeat. One day, after seeing the shed open again, I kind of joked and said, "Sorry, Rory, we cleared out your stuff." Not long after that, my grandmother took a nap. When she woke up, she was crying. She came and told me about the dream she'd just had, and as she was telling it, I started getting emotional too. She said, "I saw Rory from behind. He was far away, and I kept trying to get his attention. I was waving and calling out, 'Rory, Rory.' Then he turned around and started walking toward me. At first, I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew it was him, and he was walking all by himself. That part mattered because before he passed, Rory had been dealing with serious health problems. He hadn't been very mobile, and he used to say all the time that he couldn't wait to walk again. She said, when he got close to me, we hugged, and when he pulled away, his face looked young again. Then she asked him, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Don't worry, I'm on my way to the pearly white gates." That was the end of the dream. The only thing I asked her was, "Did he look the age he was when you first met him?" And she said, "Yes." After that dream, the shed stopped opening. For a little more context, my Uncle Evan passed from cancer. Rory had been struggling with severe health complications, and near the end, my grandmother said he looked up toward the light and stared, almost like he could see where he was going next. I don't know exactly what all of it means. I just know how it felt. I love you, Rory and Evan. Thank you for visiting in the little ways you could. Ever since then, I've been more curious about the afterlife and other people's stories. Even when people talk about spirits as bad, I don't think we can always assume we understand what's happening. I burn sage sometimes, mostly because I love the smell and it helps me sleep. But part of me has wondered if things like scent still affect loved ones after they're gone. It's strange to think about, but also beautiful. Maybe some senses carry farther than we know. I've had strange things happen around me for as long as I can remember, honestly. And it's not just me. My mom had things happen to her when she was young too, so I grew up knowing that some things don't always have a neat little explanation tied around them. One of the first things that really stayed with me happened when I was little, probably around 7 or 8. I was brushing my teeth one morning, half asleep, just staring into the mirror like you do. And in the reflection, I saw this dark figure standing in my brother's doorway. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but when I turned around, it was still there. It didn't move. It didn't fade. It just stood there. I remember waiting for a second, hoping it would somehow make sense, and then I ran downstairs. My mom didn't brush it off. She didn't laugh or tell me I was imagining things. She went straight upstairs with my dad. Later, she told me she'd seen the same kind of figure when we first moved into that house. I would have been about 4 then. She saw it leaning over my brother's cot while he was downstairs. So that has always sat badly with me. Another thing I only really pieced together recently was about this huge stuffed koala I had when I was little. I wanted it so badly in the shop. I mean, full tears, clinging onto it, the whole dramatic child performance. It was almost half my size. My parents ended up getting it for me for Christmas, and I kept it on my bed for ages. But sometimes, I could swear it had shifted slightly, like it wasn't exactly where I'd left it. I kept telling myself it was just the bedding moving, or me knocking it in my sleep. Then one night, its arm lifted up and dropped right onto my head. After that, I never slept with it again. I still own it, weirdly enough. I just don't keep it anywhere near my bed. Things also seem to get more active around Halloween, which I know sounds painfully cliché, but it's true. We've had doors slam, running footsteps through the hallway, sounds going down the stairs, then into the downstairs hall, and then the kitchen door opening by itself. That was the night my mom put her cross back on and basically decided she was done playing brave. The voices are newer, though. I never used to hear voices before this year. Since early last summer, everything has become more intense, and lately, it feels like it's getting out of hand. I've been struggling to sleep, and if I stay upstairs too long, I start feeling sick, like the air has gone heavy. The worst part is that the voices sound almost exactly like my youngest sister and my brother. With everyone else, it's a little off, just enough that you know something isn't right. But with those two, it's frighteningly close. It'll call our names, use nicknames, all of it. My other sister once had an entire conversation with something outside the bathroom door because she thought it was our youngest sister. That's how convincing it can be. We try not to answer it. We really do. But sometimes, it catches you before you've had time to think. More recently, things have started moving. Not disappearing and turning up somewhere else, but actually moving in front of us. A controller flipped off the sofa. A football slammed down onto the floor. A little crochet sonic tapestry my friend made me was thrown off my bed and hit me in the head. It didn't hurt, but it made absolutely no sense. It was balled up and came at an angle, like something had tossed it. For context, we live in England, in one of those older 1950s houses. It was built over old lime quarries, so there are sinkholes around the area sometimes, though never right next to us. For years, we blamed little sounds on floorboards, pipes, the structure, all the normal house stuff. But after the council came out to fix a few things, and after structural engineers checked parts of the house, it honestly felt like the activity got worse. There are 6 of us living here, so for a long time we assumed noises were just each other. Someone walking around, someone opening a door, someone moving something. But now, we know when it isn't one of us. Yesterday wasn't too bad, mostly because I slept downstairs for a lot of the day. There was no way I was staying alone in my room after what happened earlier in the week. I did hear my sister's metal bunk bed creaking upstairs, like someone was climbing into it and shifting around. And then there was a growl near my bed. I can't even properly explain what it sounded like. It didn't sound English. It didn't sound like my mom or anyone in the house. It was just this low, awful sound, and I knew very quickly that it wasn't normal. Apart from those 2 things, yesterday was quieter. Today I've been out most of the day, and honestly, being away from the house has helped. I'm not really sure what to do anymore. I'm trying to stay calm, and I know some of it probably sounds unbelievable, but living with it is different. When it knows your family's voices, when it moves things, when it makes you feel sick just being upstairs, it stops feeling like a few odd noises in an old house. It starts feeling personal. I only started trying to record the voices recently because it happens so randomly that it's almost impossible to catch. One minute the house is completely normal, and then the next, someone hears something they absolutely shouldn't. We've been talking about getting an indoor camera, maybe one of those little home security ones, but they're so expensive. And with birthdays coming up this month, plus my formal next week, money is already being stretched thin. My mom has seen the same shadow I saw. We haven't seen it that clearly in years, thankfully, but I do still catch quick glimpses of something now and then. As far as I know, nobody else has seen it as a full apparition. But the voices? We've all heard those. Even my dad, and he is the biggest skeptic in the house. And yes, we've heard them together, in the same room, at the same time. One of the creepiest things happened to my sister, who's 14. She was in the bathroom, and she heard what sounded exactly like our younger sister, who's 9, outside the door. It was mimicking her voice. But when she came out, our little sister wasn't there. She hadn't even come upstairs yet. And after that, it started mimicking my 14-year-old sister too. The strange thing is, most of us actually sleep pretty normally. Horror films always make it seem like everyone stays awake all night, terrified, staring into the dark. But that isn't really how it is for us. Unless the activity has been really intense, we can usually sleep. The last few days have been harder though. There's been so much going on that I've struggled to settle down. And if something wakes me up in the middle of the night, especially something I can't explain, then yeah, getting back to sleep becomes a lot harder. I did have this really weird blanket experience once. It wasn't pulled off me or anything dramatic like that. It was more like I felt a hand land on top of my duvet, right near my feet. My bed is near the ladder, and my feet were under the covers, and it honestly felt like something just sort of dropped its hand there. I froze. Completely froze. Then the other night, there was this second where it felt like the blanket tightened around my ankles. I woke up properly after that, absolutely terrified. That's the only time I've had something like that happen, but it was enough. So no, the duvet does not magically protect you. I wish it did. I've also heard crying, and not just at night. It actually happens more during the day. Yesterday, I heard this almost manic little giggle, and that was my signal to leave the house for a bit. I just thought, nope. I've seen enough horror movies to know when to remove myself from the situation. I haven't heard the giggle again since, thankfully. Ever since I was a kid and saw something in the bathroom mirror, I've always shut the bathroom door behind me. We still have that mirror, by the way, but it's hidden away now, and honestly, it has its own story. When I'm in the bathroom, I'll often stand with my back to the sink so I can see the whole room. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't like the idea of anything popping up behind me. My mom has had strange things happen outside the house too, especially in her car while it was parked out front. That's another story on its own. We haven't tried cleansing the house yet. My mom comes from an Irish Roman Catholic family, but she refuses to use holy water right now. When she was 17, her dad died suddenly, and weird things started happening in their flat. They had a priest come in to bless the place, and she said the moment he stepped through the door, the whole atmosphere changed. But after the cleansing, things got worse. They ended up moving out. The only thing we still have from that flat is an old family Bible. It's been passed down to the eldest daughter for at least 5 generations. I really don't think anything is attached to that, but I do wonder about the mirror. I'm pretty sure it came from my mom's side of the family too, so that's where we are right now. Still hearing things, still trying to catch proof, still not completely sure what we're dealing with, but I hope that gives a bit more detail. So, I've been kind of obsessed with astral projection for a while now. Not in a casual way either. More like, I kept wondering if there was some hidden door out of ordinary life. I haven't exactly been happy with my waking world, so part of me thought, maybe I can just slip out of my body for a while and go somewhere else. But after last night, I don't know. I really don't know. I was lying in bed, right on the edge of sleep. You know that strange in-between place where your body feels heavy, but your mind is still flickering? I kept repeating the same thought over and over in my head. I want to leave. I want to leave. And for a second, it actually felt like something was happening. It felt like I was sinking down through myself, like my body was becoming a shell above me. But every time I got close to letting go, something pulled me back, or scared me back. Not a noise, not a thought, something. I haven't tried again since. The thing is, dreams have always felt unusually strong for me. Ever since I was little, my dreams have been vivid, almost too vivid. Sometimes I'd even become aware I was dreaming without trying. And honestly, I think those dreams helped me survive things I didn't know how to handle when I was awake. Feeling abandoned, losing people, carrying grief I was too young to explain. Every now and then, my dreams would line up with real life in strange ways too. I wouldn't call them prophetic exactly. It was more like I had dreamed the emotional shape of something before it happened. I think the word for it might be déjà rêvé, but even that doesn't fully explain it. There's another pattern in my dreams that bothers me more. A lot of them are about being taken. My earliest nightmare was from when I was very young. I dreamed my crib was being dragged away by this twisted-looking man, and I was screaming for my parents, but they couldn't hear me. That image never really left me. What made it worse is that my mother had a similar dream not long ago. She told me she dreamed I was being carried off by a man and I was calling for her, but she couldn't reach me. She couldn't help. That chilled me more than I wanted to admit. And it wasn't just that one dream. Over the years, I've dreamed about being stolen by strange figures, mannequins, things that looked human but weren't quite right. One nightmare still stands out more than all the others. In the dream, my little sister and I were playing in the dining room of our old house. Everything seemed normal at first. The room looked the way it always did, quiet and familiar. But then, I noticed a woman sitting in the corner on the floor. She was completely still, almost like she had been placed there. She was dressed in white, and her skin was so pale it barely looked alive. Her eyes were blank and white, and she had this awful, stretched smile on her face. Not happy, not kind, just fixed there. The second I saw her, I felt this pressure in my chest, like fear had hands. But I didn't scream. I didn't even react. Somehow, I knew that if she realized I had noticed her, my sister and I would be in danger. So I tried to sound normal. I turned to my sister and said something like, "Hey, let's go play in Mom and Dad's room instead." I don't remember what happened after that. Just the feeling of trying to move calmly while every part of me wanted to run. I saw that same woman again in another dream later. I was walking through an old house I didn't recognize, opening doors, looking around. In one bedroom, there was a glass cabinet with mirrors inside, the kind people use to display little ornaments or dishes. When I looked into the mirror at the back of it, she was there. Not standing behind me, just reflected, staring straight at me with that same empty smile. Anyway, it's late now, really late. I think it's somewhere around 4 in the morning, and I'm trying to make myself sleep, though I'm not sure how well that's going to go. I keep hearing little noises outside, but I can't tell if it's the dogs shifting around, or mice, or just the house being weird. At least, I can hear my dad snoring from the other room. Strangely enough, that makes me feel a little less afraid. I've shared this story before, but it's been long enough that I feel like telling it again. And honestly, it still sits with me in a way I don't really know how to explain. I was 17 at the time, and I'd had this awful fight with my family. It was one of those teenage blow-ups where everything feels massive and unfair, and I wanted them to feel guilty. Not in any logical way, just in that dramatic, wounded way you think when you're young. Like, maybe if they saw how badly they hurt me, they'd finally understand. So after everyone left the house to pick up dinner, I stayed behind alone. I went into my mom's room and took this framed photo she kept of me and my closest friend. I put it on a dinner plate in the kitchen. And this is going to sound ridiculous, because it was ridiculous, but I squeezed a crooked symbol onto the table with ketchup. I set the plate in the middle of it and lit the photo on fire. I was furious at first, just shaking with it. But then, all at once, the whole room changed. It felt like the air got heavy. My anger just disappeared, like someone had cut a wire inside me, and in its place was this deep, freezing dread. I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone anymore. Not, maybe someone is here, but absolutely, painfully certain that something was in the room with me. I remember thinking, what am I doing? I panicked. I grabbed the plate, threw it in the sink, and turned the water on. Then I wiped the table with my hand, smearing everything away as fast as I could, and rinsed my hand under the faucet. After that, I started walking toward my bedroom. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Fast footsteps. Running footsteps. For 1 second, I thought it was my brother coming back to start the fight again. I turned around fast, ready for him. But then I remembered. I was home alone. And the footsteps didn't stop. They ran right past me. I stood there and watched absolutely nothing sprint down the hallway and into one of the back rooms. My little terrier, who had been near my feet, yelped like something had hurt her and bolted straight into my bedroom. I didn't scream. I didn't chase it. I didn't even feel curious. I just went numb. My mind had seen something it had no place to put. I went into my room, sat on my bed, and held my dog while she trembled. I stared at the wall until my family came home. When they saw the mess, they were angry, and I didn't argue with them. I just got up, cleaned everything in silence, and went to bed. I didn't tell anyone what happened for years. I was too embarrassed. Part of me still hoped that if I didn't say it out loud, it would shrink into nothing. But it didn't. A couple of weeks later, my younger brother woke the whole house up screaming. That was completely unlike him. He was crying and saying his blankets had lifted off the bed by themselves. Then we started hearing footsteps in the attic crawl space. Doors would knock from the inside of the house. Toilets would flush when nobody was near them. Little things at first, but enough to make the house feel watched. When I moved out at 19, it stopped happening at my family's place. But it followed me. Not constantly, not every day, but every few months, something happens. Almost like a reminder that whatever I brought into my life that night never really left. Other people have seen things too. At one girlfriend's house, we both heard someone run down the stairs, even though nobody was there. Another time, a TV remote lifted off the table a few inches and dropped right in front of us. Once, all the brooms and mops I kept in a bucket in the laundry room were thrown across the floor while I was eating dinner. At that exact same moment, my older brother, who was in another room, watched a little sauce cup fly off his desk. I've had closet doors slam in front of me. In a different house, another closet door swung open so hard it knocked a lamp off a table. Another girlfriend once saw a glowing, multicolored orb in the backyard while taking out the trash. It was about the size of a basketball. After that, she refused to go into the yard at night. There have been shadow figures too. My brother saw one. A friend saw one. My ex saw one. Different times, different places. There's been pounding on doors. Women's voices when no one was there. Singing in the middle of the night. I even had neighbors complain about hearing a woman singing from inside my house, even though I lived alone. Sometimes a room will suddenly fill with a smell that makes no sense. Perfume, cigar smoke, things that don't belong there. And there's more. Too much to list, honestly. Another strange thing is that when people sleep near me for the first time, they often say they had terrible nightmares. Not just bad dreams, but the kind that shake them up the next morning. The most recent thing I saw myself was my closet door flying open and knocking over a lamp at around 4 in the morning. That happened in March 2025. And just a few weeks ago, my brother was house sitting for me and told me he saw a shadow figure standing in the hallway. The part I hate talking about most is the dreams. Every so often over the years, I've had dreams that feel different from normal dreams. Heavier, more deliberate. And in 2 or 3 of them, I was told that because of what I did that night, I'm condemned when I die. That scares me in a strange way, because I'm not religious. My family wasn't religious either. We were raised atheist, so it's not like this was something I grew up believing. I'm 30 now. I was born and raised in California. And I know this is a long story, but it's something I've carried for a long time. I don't know what happened that night. I just know that after it happened, something changed. I know this may sound strange to some people, and honestly, I understand that. But I want to speak from what I've experienced and what I've come to believe over time. I believe dreams can be moments when we are spiritually vulnerable. When we're awake, our minds are alert. We can question things, resist things, filter things. But when we're asleep, that guard is lowered. And because of that, I believe some dreams are not just random images from the brain. Some of them can be spiritual interference. Now, let me be clear. I don't believe every dream has a deep meaning. Some dreams really are just dreams. Maybe you ate too late, watched something strange, or your mind is sorting through stress. But I also believe there are dreams that carry a spiritual message or warning. That's why I ask God for discernment. I ask Him to help me understand which dreams matter and which ones I should simply let go. One dream I pay attention to is when you're back in an old school building, or maybe someplace from your past, and you can't pass a test, finish a class, or move forward. To me, that kind of dream can symbolize being held back. It can represent a spirit of delay, something trying to keep you stuck in the same cycle. Maybe you're trying to grow, get a better job, improve your grades, or mature emotionally, but everything feels strangely blocked. Another dream I take seriously is when someone tries to put jewelry on you, like a necklace, bracelet, or ring. I believe that can represent agreement. Spiritually, it can symbolize something trying to bind itself to you or get permission to operate in your life. I remember one dream where a woman in a dark scarf tried to fasten a silver chain around my neck. The moment she did it, something in me knew it wasn't right. I pulled it off immediately and threw it across the room. Right after that, I woke up wide-eyed, completely alert. That's one thing I've noticed about these kinds of dreams. You don't wake up slowly or groggy. Your eyes open suddenly, and you're lying there thinking, "What was that?" It feels different. Another type of dream is when you're in a kitchen, a strange room, or some unfamiliar place with people you don't know, and they're trying to feed you. I believe food in dreams can sometimes be used as a symbol of agreement too. When you accept it, especially in the dream, it can represent receiving something spiritually that you never would have accepted while awake. I had a dream not long ago where I was standing in a small kitchen with yellow walls and a cracked tile floor. A stranger handed me something to eat, and the taste was awful. I remember turning away and trying to spit it out. Then I heard the person laugh and say something cruel, like they had tricked me. That dream disturbed me, but it also taught me something. I believe some people who practice dark spiritual work use food symbolically because eating is intimate. You take something into yourself, and spiritually, that can represent agreement. I want to make a distinction here. I'm not talking about every person who calls themselves a witch or practices something outside my beliefs. I know there are people who use that word and don't do anything harmful. That's not who I mean. I'm talking about people who intentionally try to harm others spiritually. People who use rituals, curses, manipulation, and fear. I believe those kinds of practices are not powered by the people themselves, but by darker spiritual forces that deceive them into thinking they're in control. And the sad thing is, I believe those forces hate human beings because we are made in the image of God. They can't move in the physical world the way we can, so they use people as middlemen. They tempt them with power, but in reality, they are the ones being used. Another dream to watch for is being in a car where someone else is driving, especially a stranger, and you feel like you have no control over where you're going. To me, that can symbolize your direction in life being influenced or hijacked. It can mean something is trying to pull you off the path God has for you. Dreams with snakes are another one. I believe snakes can symbolize oppression, restriction, or something trying to squeeze the life out of you. A snake constricts. So spiritually, That can represent something trying to constrict your energy, peace, ambition, emotions, or progress. Then there are sexual dreams, especially recurring ones. I believe those can sometimes be attacks from lustful spirits. Years ago, I went through a season where I kept having dreams like that almost every night. It got to the point where I felt exhausted and ashamed when I woke up. At one point, I fasted for 3 days because I wanted to break whatever spiritual stronghold was connected to it. On the third night, I woke up and saw what looked like a hideous woman above me. I couldn't speak out loud, but in my mind, I said, "I bind you in the name of Jesus Christ." Immediately, the figure changed. It became something unnatural, almost alien-looking, and then it fled. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you what I experienced. Another time, I woke up and saw a dark shadow standing beside my bed. I didn't hear it with my ears, but I sensed the words clearly in my mind. It said, "Why won't you be quiet? I hate you." Earlier that day, I had been talking with a small group at church about how easily our phones can become idols. Not because phones are evil by themselves, but because we can give them all our attention, all our time, all our affection, and then say we have no time for God. I believe whatever that shadow was, it didn't like that conversation. So here's what I want to say. If you have a dream that feels spiritually wrong, don't just roll over and ignore it. Pray as soon as you wake up. Cancel any agreement you may have made unknowingly. Ask God to restore anything that was stolen, damaged, or opened during your sleep. You can pray something like this: "Father, I come to you against this wicked dream. In the name of Jesus, I break every agreement, contract, or covenant I unknowingly entered into while I was asleep. I cancel every demonic assignment against me, and I plead the blood of Jesus over my life, my mind, my body, and my home. I revoke any authority I gave away in the dream, knowingly or prone only. Father, restore anything that was stolen, damaged, delayed, or disrupted while I slept. In the name of Jesus Christ, Amen." And before you sleep, you can pray for protection too. Something like, "In the name of Jesus, I cover myself, my name, my home, and my bed with the blood of Jesus. No spirit, curse, or agent of darkness has permission to call my name, find me, or access me in the spirit. I ask you, Father, to place a hedge of protection around my dwelling. Let my home be hidden from every evil assignment. I declare that I belong to Jesus Christ, and no darkness has authority over me. In the name of Jesus Christ, Amen." That's what I've learned so far. I'm still learning. I don't claim to know everything, but I do believe some dreams are warnings, and I believe prayer matters. So if you wake up from a dream that feels wrong in your spirit, don't panic. Don't sit in fear. Pray. Break agreement with it. Give it to God. And remember that darkness may try to intimidate, but it does not outrank Jesus. I've had strange things happen to me for as long as I can remember. Not constantly, not every day, but enough that I stopped being able to brush it all off. Some of it was small. Some of it was almost quiet. But a few moments stayed with me so clearly that even now, I can still feel the room around me when I think about them. The first one happened when I was around 5th grade. I woke up in the middle of the night, wide awake for no reason, and I saw movement inside my open closet. I just froze. I was staring at it, trying to convince myself it was nothing, when the closet door started to close by itself. Slowly. Not slammed, not pushed by a draft, just this slow, deliberate closing. I couldn't move. I just watched it inch shut, and right when it was almost closed, my blanket was yanked completely off my bed. That was it for me. I lost my mind. I ran straight into my sister's room crying, shaking, completely done with being brave. The next one happened my freshman year of high school. Again, it was the middle of the night. I woke up and saw someone standing in the doorway of my bedroom. Later on, I heard people talk about the Hat Man, but at the time I had no idea that was even a thing. What I saw looked like a dark figure, partly blocked by my dresser and old TV stand. I was scared, of course, but the weird thing is, I didn't feel like it hated me. I didn't even feel like it was unfamiliar. That house had belonged to my grandparents before us, and there had always been little stories about kind, harmless activity there. My family usually blamed it on my grandfather, or sometimes my great-grandfather, almost like they were still checking in. So I was frightened, but not terrified. After a minute, the figure stepped a little farther into the room and held out its hand, like it was greeting me. And I know how this sounds, but I reached out and took it. The next thing I remember, I woke up slumped over on my bed with one arm stretched out over the side, like I had actually been holding my hand out to someone. After that, smaller things started happening more often. Little noises. Things moved. That heavy feeling of not being alone. But the worst one happened when I was 19. I was living on my own by then, and I was on a video call with a girl I'd been talking to. I'll call her Mina. It was one of those long calls where you're not really talking the whole time. You're just there together, doing your own thing, keeping each other company. It was around 1 in the morning, and I told her I was going to grab something to drink from the kitchen. I left my phone propped up against the TV because I had been gaming, and my chair was pulled close to the screen. Before I even made it back to my room, I heard her crying. Not just upset, hysterical. I ran back in, and she was begging me to leave the house. She kept saying there was something there with me. I asked her what she saw, but she couldn't explain it. She just kept saying, "Please leave. Please get out." She was so scared that I didn't argue. I grabbed my keys and left. I drove back to my dad's house, which was the old family house, the same place where I'd had those earlier experiences. It was the weekend, so my dad and his partner were out for the night. I still had a key, so I let myself in and went to my old bedroom, which had been turned into a guest room. But I couldn't sleep. Mina had finally fallen asleep on the call, but before she did, she still wouldn't tell me much. All she said was that there had been someone in my house, and that she knew it wasn't a person. So there I was, lying in my old room, still shaken, watching videos on my phone just to keep my mind busy. Then I heard a knock on the bedroom door. It had a rhythm to it, not random, not like the house settling. It sounded exactly like the kind of knock someone gives when they know you're inside and they're waiting politely. I thought it was my dad. I figured he had come home, seen my car, and wanted to check on me. So I got up and opened the door. No one was there. Right then, the grandfather clock in the hallway started chiming, and almost at the same time, this little wooden block that had been wedged into a makeshift latch on the pet gate shot loose and clattered across the kitchen floor. That was enough. I left again. I got in my car and drove back to my own place. By then, it was close to 4 in the morning. I was exhausted, so I stopped at a gas station, bought a soda for the caffeine, and tried to convince myself I was just rattled and overthinking everything. When I got home, I locked every door behind me as I moved through the house. I even shut the bathroom door while I used it because I was that on edge. And then I heard it, the same knock, same rhythm, at my bedroom door. I'm not exaggerating when I say I could not make myself open that door. I climbed out of my bedroom window instead, got back into my car, drove to a public park, and slept there until the sun came up. I don't know what followed me that night. I don't know if it started at my house, or if it had been waiting at the old family place, or if it was something that had always been around me. But I know that knock, and I hope I never hear it again. I still think about that house sometimes, even now. We moved in around 2013, when I was 12. It was this tall, 3-story house in a really nice neighborhood, and the rent was strangely cheap for the size of it. At the time, I didn't question it much. I was just excited because, for the first time in my life, I finally had my own bedroom. I remember one of the first nights there so clearly. I was sitting on my bed, right beside the window, while my little brother and one of his friends were playing on the floor. They had their backs turned, so they weren't looking at the window, but I was. That's when the blinds started moving. Not just settling, not gently swaying. They shuffled, like someone had brushed past them. But the window was completely shut. There was no breeze, no draft. Nothing. I asked them, "Did you see that?" My brother's friend immediately got scared and ran out of the room to find her mom. My brother followed her, and when he left, he shut my door behind him. A minute later, I saw the door handle move. It pushed down slowly, like someone was standing on the other side holding it. Then it lifted back up. At first, I thought, okay, they're trying to scare me. So I got up and opened the door. There was no one there. No one was even on that floor. My room was on the second floor, along with the living room, a tiny empty room, and my bathroom. My parents' room and my brother's room were upstairs on the third floor. But at that moment, everyone else was downstairs in the kitchen. When I told my family, they didn't really believe me. They thought I was nervous because the house was new, and maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But that was only the beginning. About a year later, the front door sensor started acting weird. It was supposed to make a chime only when the front door opened, but for some reason, it also started chiming when someone stepped on certain stairs leading down to the front door. One night, my parents were awake in bed when they heard the chime. They both sat up immediately and listened. My dad went to check if someone had broken in, or if my brother or I had tried to sneak downstairs. But we were both asleep. He checked the rooms, the doors, everything. Nothing looked wrong. Our cat followed him downstairs because, for some reason, that cat hated going down alone at night. He would always meow until someone came with him. So my dad stood there while the cat ate, and then he felt this sudden rush of cold air move past him. He panicked and went straight back upstairs. A few minutes later, my parents heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps. The kind that sounded like a grown man slowly walking up the stairs toward my floor. That was the moment they stopped trying to explain everything away. Other things happened too. My parents would hear scraping sounds outside their bedroom window, like metal dragging against the grating. Sometimes it sounded like someone was placing a big ladder against the house in the middle of the night. They would look outside, thinking maybe someone was breaking in nearby. But there was never anyone there. Our dog also used to bark at this old glass cabinet my parents had bought secondhand. It was an antique display cabinet, the kind people use for wine glasses or fancy dishes. My parents had bought it from someone clearing out belongings after their parents had passed away. The dog would just stand there barking at it, like something was standing right beside it. The main bathroom upstairs had a bathtub with a shower curtain, and the rod would randomly crash down in the middle of the night. That thing was solid. You could tug on it and it wouldn't move. Even the cat jumping around wouldn't have knocked it loose. But every now and then, we'd hear it fall. I also remember getting this awful feeling at night, like someone was watching me. I'd be alone in my room, and the feeling would get so intense that I'd hide under my duvet and pray until I fell asleep. My brother was scared too. He hated sleeping alone in that house. He was always asking if he could sleep in my room or with my parents. One day, A woman who had lived there before us came by to collect some mail that was still being sent to the house. My mom opened the door and invited her inside, just to be polite. The woman refused. She wouldn't even step over the threshold. She barely looked into the house at all. My mom said the whole interaction felt strange, like the woman was scared to be near the place. Then there was the angel clock. We had this heavy stone angel clock sitting on the fireplace in the living room. One night, my parents heard a loud bang from downstairs. The living room was directly underneath their bedroom, but my mom didn't go check until morning. When she did, the clock was smashed on the floor in the middle of the room, about 2 or 3 meters away from the fireplace. At first, they tried to blame the cat. Maybe he jumped up and knocked it down, but that didn't make sense because if it had simply fallen, it would have landed near the fireplace. It wouldn't have flown across the room. And then they remembered. The living room door had been closed. That door always shut by itself unless you put a stopper in front of it, and it was heavier than normal. At night, it was always closed. The cat hadn't been inside. The last thing that happened was when we were moving out, less than 3 years after moving in. The house was mostly empty, and my mom was there cleaning while I was at school. She noticed the closed door to my old room shaking violently, like there was a storm inside and the window had been left open. But the window was shut. My mom, trying to calm herself down, jokingly said something like, "If you're going to scare me, you could at least help me clean." Right after she said that, the door handle went all the way down, and it stayed down. She said it felt like forever because she was frozen there, terrified. It didn't spring back up until she nervously said, "I was only joking." Years later, my mom found out from a family friend who worked with the police that there had been a murder in that house in 2006, only 7 years before we moved in. I've lived on Haudenosaunee land for as long as I can remember. Every little town I've called home was built over places that held history long before any of us arrived here. And growing up, I was lucky enough to hear stories from native classmates, elders who visited our school, and a close friend whose family is from a different nation out in the Great Lakes region, but who still had ties to people near where I live now. These were never treated like campfire stories around here. People spoke about them with respect, with care, like they were part of the land itself. Now I live right near the edge of a reservation, and when my partner and I first moved in, an older neighbor told us, very plainly, that we might hear things in the woods. We might see things too. But he said not to be afraid. Just take care of the land, and don't act like it belongs only to you. And honestly, for a long time, that brought me comfort. The woods never felt empty to me, but they didn't feel hostile either. My garden started thriving. The trees crept in closer each season, and birds, deer, foxes, all of it started returning in this quiet, beautiful way. It felt like the place had accepted us, at least a little. Then, the development started. I won't say exactly what it is, because it would make my location too easy to figure out. But a huge project came into town and started tearing through acres and acres of land. Since then, the whole feeling around here has shifted. It's hard to explain, but the air feels tense now, like something has been disturbed and is standing up straighter. One rainy night, I heard footsteps in my yard. Clear footsteps too. Wet mud, steady movement. Close enough that I grabbed a flashlight and called out, thinking maybe it was a security guard from the worksite nearby. But there was nobody there. The sound stopped, and the yard was empty. Not long after that, I started seeing strange lights back in the woods behind the house. Not headlights, not porch lights, just small lights moving where there shouldn't have been anything moving. Then yesterday, I was talking with my neighbor, Nora. She moved here after I did, and she's not someone who exaggerates. She's kind, practical, not really into paranormal things at all. She looked at me with this serious expression and said, "Can I ask you something strange?" I said, "Of course." And she asked me if I had ever seen something running down the road. I told her I hadn't, and then she told me what happened. She'd been outside sometime after midnight, maybe around 1 in the morning, when she heard the sound of bare feet slapping against the pavement. When she turned, she saw a tall, pale figure running down the road. She said it looked unclothed, but not in a normal human way. No clear features like you'd expect. Just this long, white shape moving fast through the dark. The moment she saw it, she ran back to the cabin. While she was telling me this, her boyfriend, who has lived here his entire life, joined the conversation and said that several people in his family have seen the same thing. Not constantly, not every night, but enough that it's become something people around here know about. And the timing chilled me, because he said the sightings really started about a year or two ago, right around when the land clearing began. I believed her, not because I wanted to, but because of the way she said it. She looked almost embarrassed to bring it up, like she was hoping I'd laugh so she could take it back. But she wasn't joking. She was scared. And after what I've heard in my own yard, after the lights in the trees, after the way this place has started to feel, I can't dismiss it. I keep thinking about the land, about what it held before all this noise and machinery, about what happens when people tear into a place that was never theirs to wound. I don't know what she saw. I don't know what I heard. I won't pretend to understand traditions that aren't mine, but I do know this place has been good to me. I love it here. And more than anything, I want to honor the land, respect the people who cared for it long before me, and do whatever I can to live here gently. I live in the UK, in a big old house. And when I say old, I mean properly old. It was built sometime in the 1930s, and it has all the little sounds you would expect from a house like that. The creaks, the echoes, the odd knocks in the walls. So at first, I never really thought too much of it. I moved in during the summer of 2020 with my boyfriend at the time. I'll call him Ben. I've always believed in the paranormal because I've had a few strange experiences since I was young, but Ben was the complete opposite. He was very skeptical. He always had a logical explanation for everything. That changed in this house. For the first several months, everything felt normal. Nothing stood out. But then, around spring of 2021, not long after I found out I was pregnant, something started happening. I was working full-time during my pregnancy, but during my first trimester, I was completely exhausted. One morning, I felt so drained that I called in sick. Ben had already gone to work, so I was home alone. I went back upstairs, got into bed, and tried to sleep. I had only been asleep from the future, but I into the paranormal. I went back upstairs, got into bed, and tried to sleep. I had only been asleep from the 2021, which is updated to approach the end of the time. I had only been asleep from the 2021, which is helping to director too longs of a strongable. I had only been asleep from the 2021, which is updated to approach the end of the time. I moved in the UK, it was really often, but then was a very obstinate, and then I had any period. I had only been asleep for maybe half an hour when I woke up because I heard Ben's voice calling me from downstairs. It sounded exactly like him. I remember lying there confused because he had only just left. I called back asking why he was home, thinking maybe he had forgotten something or got his shift time wrong. But there was no answer. So I got up and checked the house. There was nobody there. I looked in every room, and I even texted Ben to ask if he had come back for any reason. He didn't reply right away because he was working, so I went back to bed, but I couldn't really settle. Later, when he called me on his lunch break, I asked him again if he had been home. He said no. When I told him what I had heard, he laughed it off and said I was probably just tired. Honestly, at the time, he almost convinced me I had imagined it. But that was only the beginning. A few months later, something happened to Ben. I was about 5 months pregnant by then, and I had gotten big quite quickly. Getting in and out of the bath was difficult, so I would usually call down to Ben when I was ready to get out, and he would come help me. One night, I was in the bath when suddenly Ben came running upstairs and burst into the bathroom, looking panicked. He asked, "Are you okay?" I just stared at him and said, "Yes, why?" He said he had heard me scream his name. Not call it, scream it. But I hadn't made a sound. At first, he thought I was joking. He kept asking me why I had shouted for him, and I kept telling him I hadn't. Eventually, he realized I was being serious, and I could see it really shook him. He stayed in the bathroom with me until I was finished, because neither of us wanted to be alone after that. After that, things went quiet for a while. Then our son was born. When he was around 6 months old, Ben and I were downstairs watching a film one night when we both heard the loud, sharp scream of a baby. We jumped up immediately. I don't think either of us had ever moved that fast. We ran upstairs into the bedroom, expecting to find our son awake and crying. But he was fast asleep, still wrapped up, still peaceful, completely silent. We looked at each other, and I remember feeling my stomach drop. We went back downstairs and checked the baby monitor footage from the previous few minutes. There was nothing. No crying, no movement. The scream hadn't been picked up at all. That was when Ben started researching, and we both ended up thinking it might be some kind of mimic. Whatever it was, it seemed to copy voices it had heard in the house. Mine, Ben's, and even the baby crying. A year or so later, Ben and I split up. For a while, nothing much happened. I stayed in the house with my son during the week, and he would go to Ben's on the weekends while I worked. That meant I was alone in the house quite a bit. After a few months, I started noticing little things again. Footsteps upstairs when nobody was up there. Small noises. Items turning up in places I knew I hadn't left them. My mom started visiting more often to keep me company, and even she noticed odd things happening. Sometimes I would hear Ben calling me from upstairs, even though he wasn't there. I ignored it every time. I didn't want to answer it. I didn't want to give it attention. For the longest time, I didn't feel like it was dangerous. Strange, yes. Creepy, definitely. But not dark. It almost felt playful in a way, like it was just trying to get a reaction. But my most recent experience has made me question everything. A couple of nights ago, my mom was staying with me and my son, who was 4 now. She had recently had an operation and needed someone to look after her while she recovered from the anesthetic, so I let her sleep in my bed, and I slept downstairs on the sofa. It was around 2 in the morning. I was still awake, scrolling on my phone, when I heard a deep male voice call my name. It didn't sound like Ben. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. That is what scared me the most. I sat up, completely frozen for a second, trying to work out if I had really heard it. At first, I thought maybe Ben had come in because he is the only man with a key to my house. But the voice was wrong. It was deeper, unfamiliar. I waited for a minute, listening. Nothing. Eventually, I got up, grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, which happened to be one of my son's plastic duck toys on a stick, and started checking the house. I checked my son's room first. He was asleep. Then I checked on my mom. She was asleep too. I walked around the rest of the house and found nobody. So I went back to the sofa, trying to calm myself down. But I had barely sat down when I heard the voice again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the entryway. It echoed. I got up again, still holding this ridiculous plastic duck, fully ready to defend my house with it if I had to. But there was nobody there. Then it said my name again. This time, it sounded like it was right beside me. I don't know what came over me, but I just snapped. I told it to go away and let me sleep. And after that, it stopped. The next morning, I asked my mom if she had heard anything, but she had been completely knocked out from the medication. She thinks I should get someone in to see if they can sense anything in the house, but I'm honestly hesitant. I don't want to encourage whatever this is. I don't want to annoy it either. What bothers me is that I didn't recognize the voice. There haven't been many men in my house. I have a small family and an even smaller circle of friends, so I have no idea whose voice it could have been copying. And now I'm wondering if I was wrong all along. Maybe it isn't just mimicking us. Maybe something has been living here with me this whole time. So, the house my family lives in was built sometime in the early 80s, and before we ever moved in, an elderly woman named Miss Edna lived there. From what I understand, she passed away peacefully from old age. Now, I wasn't even born yet when my family first moved in, so I'm only telling you what they told me about those early days. But I can tell you this much: I've had my own experiences in that house too. Plenty of them. After my family got settled, strange things started happening almost right away. Everybody began dreaming about this woman. My older sister said she dreamed that Miss Edna was screaming at her, but no sound was coming out. And in the dream, her hair kept moving in this awful way, almost like it was disappearing into her head and coming back out again. My dad was the type who didn't believe in ghosts at all, not even a little. But even he admitted he had a dream about her. He said he was asleep on the couch and suddenly she was floating right above him, screaming at him to get out of her house. My mom is very religious, and one day she was sitting on her bed when she felt something in the room with her. She didn't see anyone, but she said she knew Miss Edna was there. So my mom spoke out loud and said, "This is our home now. We bought it with money we worked hard to save. We're going to live here, grow old here, and one day pass on here too. I'm sorry for what happened to you, but you have to understand that this is our home now." And after that, things actually got quieter. Not completely quiet, but calmer. Every now and then, little things would still happen. A chair might shift. The sink might turn on by itself. The stove would act strange. But then I was born, and according to my family, everything stopped. They started to realize that when babies or little kids were in the house, Miss Edna didn't seem to bother anyone. My mom even told me she once saw her standing beside my crib, just looking down at me. Not angry, not threatening, more like she was happy there was a baby in the house again. Years passed, and then around 2019, my sister went through a divorce. She had been living in this big house, and my dad didn't like the idea of her being there alone. So he asked me if I would stay with her for a while, just so she wouldn't feel isolated. I agreed. Then in 2023, our dad passed away. After that, none of us wanted our mom living alone either. So we sold my sister's house and moved back in with my mom. And once we came back, everything started up again. The lights would flicker. People started having dreams about Miss Edna again. One night, we were all sitting around talking about what had been happening, and suddenly the power cut off. Then it came back on. Then it cut off again. And I swear, we could hear the breaker being flipped. Another time, I was sitting at the kitchen table fixing my mom's laptop. 3 of my cats were in there with me, just watching like they were little furry supervisors. Then, all of a sudden, I heard singing coming from underneath the house. Not outside, under the house. And all 3 cats slowly turned their heads toward the sound at the exact same time. That drained the blood right out of me. Then there was another night when I walked into my bedroom. My fiancé was asleep, and as soon as I stepped through the door, this black shadow shot across the room and went straight through the wall. It knocked over the trash can as it passed. Me and one of my cats ran out of that room so fast, we probably looked like a cartoon. Now, this next part is a little embarrassing, but it happened, so I'll just say it. It was around 8 in the morning. I had just woken up, and my stomach started doing that emergency warning signal where your whole body knows you need the bathroom immediately. So I went in, sat down, and started scrolling through my phone. Then I heard this loud scratching coming from the bathtub. I pulled the shower curtain open. Nothing. But the scratching kept going. So I said, "Can you please stop?" And it stopped. That made me suspicious, because it stopped exactly when I asked. So I said, "Do it again." And the scratching started again. Then I said, "Stop." And it stopped again. Now, maybe it was an animal under the house. I'm not saying it absolutely wasn't, but the timing of it still bothers me. Another time, I was taking a shower. I had just finished washing my hair when something snapped the shower curtain hard. Not a little tap. I mean, it flicked it hard enough to make me jump. When I looked up, I saw what looked like a figure dart into the bathroom closet. I froze for a second. Then my survival instincts kicked in. I shut the water off as fast as I could and ran straight into the bedroom where my fiancée was, completely naked and dripping water everywhere. She looked at me and asked what happened. I told her, and she just started laughing, probably because I was standing there terrified, soaked, and fully exposed like I had just escaped a haunted car wash. But the voice mimicking is what really made me think something in that house knows how to play with people. One night, I was cooking dinner for me and my fiancé when I heard her yell, "Babe!" So I went into the room and asked what she needed. She looked at me and said, "I didn't call you." I figured maybe I imagined it, so I went back to cooking. A few minutes later, I heard it again. "Babe." I went back in and asked, "Did you call me, or am I losing it?" She laughed and said, "I didn't say anything. You're hearing things." So I went back to the kitchen. Then it happened a third time. "Babe!" This time, I walked in smiling because I thought she had to be messing with me. I said, "Are you playing around?" She promised me she wasn't. She said she had been lying there on her phone the whole time, watching videos, and hadn't called me once. That's when I started thinking maybe Miss Edna, or whatever is in that house, was mimicking her voice. And it wasn't just me. One day, I was talking with my nephew and his wife when she suddenly said, "Yeah, babe," like she was answering somebody. I asked her, "Why did you say that?" She looked confused and said, "You didn't hear her call you?" So I went to check with my fiancé, and she hadn't said anything. My nephew's wife looked at me and said, "Don't talk about it. The last thing we need to do is talk about it." And honestly, that stuck with me. So now I've been seriously thinking about putting cameras inside the house, just to see if I can catch something. Because at this point, I don't know if Miss Edna is harmless, protective, lonely, or something else entirely. But I do know this. That house has never felt empty. I'm writing this at 5:47 in the morning, and honestly, I'm still shaking from what happened tonight. I know a lot of people probably won't believe me, but I don't really know where else to put this. I just need to tell someone. A little before Christmas last year, my mom and I moved into a 2-bedroom flat. It's a strange sort of setup because we don't really have neighbors beside us, only people above and below. When we first came to view the place, I remember getting this horrible feeling from it. The hallway was really dark, and the bathroom felt cold and miserable in a way I couldn't explain. But the rest of the flat was lovely. It was spacious, clean, and exactly what we needed. So we took it. About a week after we got the keys, we were there tidying up and getting ready to move our things in. I was sitting near the heater with my dog Barney when I heard my mom call my name 3 times from down the hall. So I got up and went to see what she wanted. At the end of the hallway, her bedroom is on the right, and on the left there's the shower room, the front door, and a storage cupboard. As I stepped into the hall, I saw my mom walk into the bathroom. Clear as anything. I followed her in straight away, but when I got there, she wasn't inside. I just froze. I walked back into the hallway, completely confused, and there she was, standing in the doorway of her bedroom, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I'd just seen her go into the bathroom, but of course she didn't believe me. That was the first time. It definitely wasn't the last. Since then, I've heard her calling my name from the bathroom at least once or twice a week. I've also seen her walk into that same bathroom maybe 4 or 5 times, only to find out she was never there at all. There's a pull switch in the bathroom, the kind with a string hanging from the ceiling. On the end of it is this little clay fish. At night, we hear it hitting the wall over and over again, like someone is grabbing the string and swinging it hard. And there are actual marks on the wall from where it's been banging against it. This has been going on for nearly 5 months now. The storage cupboard is strange too. It has one of those doors that can't just drift open. If it's shut, it's properly shut. You have to push the handle all the way down to open it. But somehow, it opens by itself. One time, it opened while I was in the shower. The cupboard door blocked the bathroom door from the outside, and I was trapped in there until someone moved it. I still don't understand how that could have happened. Tonight, my dad came over to visit. He's had experiences with spirits and strange things since he was younger, though that's a whole other story. It was around 2 in the morning when everything started getting worse. We were sitting at the table, talking about what had been happening in the flat. As I was explaining it all to him, the room suddenly went freezing cold. Not just a little chilly. It was like the warmth had been sucked out of the room. Barney jumped up and stared at one exact spot, completely still. My dad looked at me and quietly said, "It's in here." I panicked and got up straight away. I stood behind him because I honestly didn't know what else to do. I've never felt anything like that before. It was heavy, like the air itself had turned sad. After a little while, the feeling passed. We calmed down and started talking again. Then my dad went into the kitchen to get a drink, and while he was gone, I said out loud, "If something is here, can you give me a sign? Just show me you're here and that I don't need to be scared." A few minutes later, my dad came back in. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. Then we heard 3 knocks come from the wall. That's when I really started to panic, because that wall is solid brick. On the other side of it is outside. We're on the middle floor, so there's no way someone could have just been standing there knocking. I still can't think of any normal explanation for it. About 10 or 15 minutes after that, my dad was telling me about a strange experience he had when he was younger. Something he once saw outside his window that he swore didn't look human. While he was talking, there was a huge bang from the hallway. It sounded like something had been thrown. Neither of us wanted to leave the room to check. Then everything went quiet for a few minutes. I was starting to think maybe it had stopped. And then, right beside me, I heard my mom's voice say, "Come on." It sounded so close. But my mom was asleep on the other side of the flat. She's a very deep sleeper too. My dad called out to her, but there was no answer. We checked later, and she had been asleep the whole time. After that, for about 10 minutes, we kept hearing noises from inside the living room and dining area where we were sitting. At one point, I heard what sounded like a small child saying,
"Dad."
Then there was another noise that sounded almost like a person trying to meow. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that's what it was. It's now 5:51, and the washing machine has just turned on by itself. Everyone else is asleep, and the last time I checked, the washing machine door was open. I'm trying really hard not to lose it, but I don't know what to do. Has anyone experienced something like this before? Does this sound like a mimic? Or maybe an upset spirit? I don't know. The strangest part is that you can tell when it's in the room. The temperature drops suddenly, and this awful feeling comes over you. It feels overwhelming and deeply sad, like you're about to cry for no reason. I'm sorry if this sounds messy. I haven't slept, and I'm honestly having a bit of a panic attack right now. I used to love Legos before I ever set foot there. Not the real Legos. Not yet. I loved the version I had built in my head from stories. The lights, the music, the noise, the way the city seemed to keep breathing long after everyone else's night had gone quiet. Where I grew up in the East, things were calmer, predictable. Once evening came, shops closed, streets emptied, and people returned home. But Legos sounded different. Legos sounded alive. None of my siblings had ever been there before. My parents had only visited years earlier, during their honeymoon. So to me, Legos felt almost mythical, like a place people talked about, but I wasn't sure I would ever really touch. Then my aunt called. She said my cousin Sade had just returned from Canada, and the family was throwing her a welcome party in Legos. Sade and I had always been close. We were cousins by blood, but honestly, we were more like sisters. So when she told me I had to come, I started begging my parents immediately. At first, they said no. I had never traveled alone before. I had never even been on a plane. And Legos, to them, was too big, too fast, too much. But I begged and begged until they finally agreed. That trip became my first flight and my first time in Legos. I still remember stepping out of the airport. The air felt different, hotter, heavier, somehow louder. Sade picked me up, and as we drove through the city, she kept pointing things out, telling me what had changed and what was still the same. For her, it was a homecoming. For me, it felt like entering a story I had been reading my whole life. The next day was her welcome party, and she had planned everything beautifully. It had this mix of Western elegance and Yoruba tradition. The music, the colors, the food, the people, everything felt rich and full of life. Sade even chose my outfit for me. A gorgeous Ashoke dress, black heels, jewelry, the whole thing. Then she sat me down and did my makeup herself. When I finally looked in the mirror, I almost laughed. I didn't look like the quiet girl from the East anymore. I looked bold, grown, almost royal. After the party, Sade said we were not going to waste the night. She wanted me to experience Legos properly. So we went out. First, we went to a club, one of those places where the music feels like it is inside your bones. At first, I just watched everyone. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't dancing much. I was just trying to take it all in. But Sade would not let me hide in the corner. She kept pulling me along, laughing, telling me, "You came to Legos, so behave like you came to Legos." At some point, we even ended up at a strip club. I was shy, honestly, completely out of my depth. But Sade handed me some cash and encouraged me to spray it. Then she teased me about getting a lap dance. I hesitated. Then I thought, well, when else would I ever do something like this? So I said yes. It was wild, strange, a little overwhelming. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't curious, or that some part of me didn't enjoy the madness of it all. Then came the tequila. One shot became two. Two became three. And before long, the room started moving in a way I knew it shouldn't. I wasn't completely drunk, but I felt lighter than myself, like my caution had loosened its grip. When we returned to the main club, I sat at the bar to steady myself. Sade sat with me for a little while, but then she noticed a tall, fair, muscular man across the room. And if you know Sade, you know she has never been the type to wait for life to come to her. She leaned close to me and smiled. "That one is calling my name," she said. Then she stood up and walked straight to him. And just like that, I was alone at the bar. That was when I met him. He came up quietly, not in an aggressive way, not like the other men who had been trying too hard all night. He had a calmness about him, dark-skinned, simple-looking, soft-spoken. He introduced himself as Cheyenne. We started talking, and somehow, it was easy. Too easy, maybe. We laughed like we already knew each other. He asked about where I was from, and I told him this was my first time in Lagos. He smiled and said Lagos had a way of welcoming people properly. I remember feeling comfortable with him. That was the strange part. After some time, we exchanged numbers. Not long after, Sade called me over and said we had to leave because her mother had been calling. I said goodbye to Cheyenne, thinking maybe we would talk later. Maybe not. I wasn't expecting anything serious. When we got home, Sade's mother asked where we had been. We gave a vague answer and escaped before she could ask too many questions. The moment I got to my room, sleep swallowed me. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Cheyenne. I don't know why, but hearing his voice made me smile. We talked for a while, and it felt like we were continuing the same conversation from the night before. He asked if we could meet again. I only had 2 days left in Lagos, and something in me wanted to see him. I knew I couldn't tell Sade's mother I was going to meet a guy, because that news would fly straight to my own mother before sunset. So I begged Sade to cover for me. She agreed, but she made me promise we would meet up later at a specific place. That afternoon, she dropped me off at a fun park where I was supposed to meet Cheyenne. He arrived a little late, apologizing softly, and Sade left soon after to meet the guy she had met the night before. So there I was, alone with him. And honestly, I had a beautiful time. We played games, we laughed, we bought snacks. We walked around like two people who had known each other far longer than one day. We even took pictures together, although he kept saying he hated pictures. Something about him made me feel seen. I had been careful with my heart since my first heartbreak, but with him, I felt that small, dangerous spark again. The kind that makes you ignore the quiet warning in your chest. Sade checked on me a few times, and I told her I was fine. And I was. Until I wasn't. At some point, Cheyenne told me he needed to use the restroom. He asked me to wait for him. So I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. After almost an hour, I called his number. It didn't go through. I tried again. This time, I got a message saying the number did not exist. I stared at my phone, confused. That made no sense. He had called me that morning. We had spoken. I tried again and again, but nothing worked. So I went to look for him. I walked toward the restroom area and asked a security guard if he had seen a man matching Cheyenne's description. The guard checked inside, came back, and said nobody was there. I asked another person, then another. No one had seen him. That was when my stomach tightened. I pulled out my phone to show them the pictures we had taken together. I opened the first one and held it out. The security guard looked at it, then looked at me strangely. He said, "Madam, you are the only one in this picture." I laughed at first because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. I looked down at the screen. I could see Cheyenne beside me, clear, smiling, standing close. But everyone around me insisted there was no one there. I showed the picture to another person. Same thing. Then another. They all said the same thing. Only me. My hands started shaking. I called Sade and asked her if she had really seen the man I was talking to at the club the night before. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said she had only seen a man standing near me from behind. She never saw his face clearly. That was when fear entered my body properly. I stood there, trying to force my mind to find a normal explanation. Maybe I had been drunk. Maybe I had misunderstood something. Maybe everyone was playing a prank. But none of it made sense. I knew what I saw. I knew who I had spent the day with. And yet suddenly, it felt like I had been walking through Lagos beside someone who was not fully there. Eventually, Sade came to get me. I didn't tell her everything. Not properly. Some things feel too heavy when you say them out loud. That night, I prayed before I slept. I prayed hard. And the next morning, at exactly 7:30, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Cheyenne. I want to tell you about a story that was passed down through a family with absolute seriousness. Not the kind of story people tell for fun at parties, or the kind that gets exaggerated for attention. This was more like a warning. The sort of warning that gets repeated quietly, generation after generation, because the people who first heard it never forgot what happened. A friend of mine, Jonah Ingle, told me this story about his grandmother. She used to speak about it as something completely real, and while most grandparents warn children about crossing roads, staying away from deep water, or not talking to strangers, Jonah's grandmother had one rule she made sure everyone understood. Never play with a Ouija board. The events took place sometime in the 1940s, though the exact year has been blurred by time. Jonah's great-grandfather, Leonard, was married to a woman named Clara. They had a little daughter together named Elise, who would later become Jonah's grandmother. Before Leonard married Clara, he had another relationship, and from that relationship, he had a daughter named Catherine. Catherine usually lived with her mother, but for a short period, she came to stay with Leonard, Clara, and young Elise. And from what Jonah's family remembers, Clara and Catherine did not get along at all. It wasn't just mild tension. It was constant arguing, cold looks, clipped words, and that heavy feeling in a house when nobody is really at peace. Clara felt like her own home had stopped belonging to her. Every day Catherine stayed, Clara grew more frustrated. She wanted the girl to go back to her mother's house, and she wanted it badly. One evening, Clara invited a few friends over. I think she just needed to breathe again. They talked, complained, laughed a little, and for a while the room felt lighter. Then someone suggested they do something that people sometimes treated as harmless entertainment back then. They brought out a Ouija board. At first it was nothing serious, just little jokes, silly questions, everyone accusing everyone else of moving the planchette. The mood was playful. Nobody seemed frightened. Nobody thought anything real was happening. Then Clara asked a question. She looked at the board and said, "When will the girl be gone?" She meant Catherine. She meant, when would Catherine leave the house and go back to her mother? The board did nothing. So Clara asked again. Still nothing. Some of the others started teasing, thinking whoever had been pushing the planchette had lost their nerve. But Clara wasn't laughing anymore. She was staring at that board, waiting. Then she asked a third time. And that was when the feeling in the room changed. Jonah said his grandmother always described it as a sudden coldness that hit everyone at once. Not a draft, not imagination, a deep, instant chill. The planchette shot across the board so fast that everyone froze. It spelled out, "She will be gone soon." And just like that, the laughter died. Nobody wanted to play anymore. They packed the board away, tried to act sensible, and ended the evening. By the next morning, Clara had almost convinced herself it had been a cruel joke. Maybe one of her friends had pushed it. Maybe someone knew how upset she was and decided to frighten her. But a few days later, something happened at Catherine's mother's home. The details have been lost over the years, but it was urgent enough that Catherine had to return immediately. Because of the situation and the distance involved, arrangements were made for her to travel by air. Leonard and Clara went with Catherine to the airport. They watched her board the plane. I always wonder what Clara felt in that moment. Maybe relief, maybe guilt, maybe the memory of those words crawling back into her mind. She will be gone soon. The plane took off, and then, right in front of them, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft lost power shortly after leaving the runway. It dropped from the sky and crashed near the airport. Catherine was killed. Only days after the board had said she would be gone soon, she was gone forever. That is the part of the story that stayed with the family. Not just the tragedy itself, but the timing, the words, the way Clara had asked the question in anger, never imagining what gone might really mean. Over the years, some details faded. The exact date, the airline, the official records, all of that became harder to trace. Maybe the names shifted slightly. Maybe the type of aircraft or journey changed in the retelling. That happens with old family stories. Time rubs the edges down. But the warning remains sharp. Jonah's grandmother never treated it as a spooky little anecdote. She treated it as something that marked the family. Something that proved, at least to her, that some doors should stay closed. And honestly, what unsettles me most is the question at the heart of it. Did that board simply predict something awful that was already going to happen? Or did Clara, in one exhausted moment of anger, invite something to answer her? Whatever the truth is, Jonah's family never forgot it. And from that day on, the rule was simple. Do not touch the board. I'm still not completely sure how to explain this, or even what kind of story it is. I don't know whether I'd call it a haunting, an apparition, a paranormal encounter, or just something my mind still hasn't found a proper place for. This happened several years ago, when I was still sharing a bedroom with my younger brother, Mason. It was late, probably somewhere between 11 at night and midnight. The room was quiet, and Mason had already fallen asleep. I was awake in my bed after having one of those emotional breakdowns that leaves you completely drained. I had been crying for a while, but I was trying hard not to make any noise because I didn't want to wake him. When I cry like that, I usually keep my eyes shut because they start to sting. I was also hoping I could just cry myself to sleep and be done with the night. But after a while, my eyes were so full of tears that I had to open them and wipe my face. And when I did, I saw a little girl standing near my bed. She was just looking at me. I froze. I knew right away it wasn't my brother. I don't have any little sisters, and this child was clearly a girl. She looked maybe 6 or 7 years old, with short hair pulled into 2 tiny ponytails on the sides of her head. The strangest part was her coloring. Her skin, her clothes, even the space around her seemed washed in this dull gray-green shade. Not glowing exactly, but not normal either. Almost like an old photograph that had been left in the rain. She was wearing clothes that didn't look modern. It looked like a darker dress over a lighter, short-sleeved shirt, and she had little flat shoes on. almost like ballet flats. I couldn't make out real colors because everything about her had that same muted, grayish-green tint. She didn't seem angry. She didn't smile. She didn't move toward me. She just stood there with this calm, blank expression, watching me. I kept staring because I honestly didn't know what else to do. Then, slowly, she started to fade. It wasn't sudden. She didn't vanish in a blink. She became thinner and dimmer, little by little, until there was almost nothing left of her. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me because I had been crying so much. So I squeezed them shut for a second, wiped my face again, and opened them, expecting her to still be there. But she was gone. I've had other strange experiences before, things I've heard or felt that I couldn't explain, but this was different. This was the only time I ever saw something so clearly, right in front of me. And what stays with me most is that she didn't feel threatening. She felt quiet, present, almost like she had simply noticed me crying and had come to look. I still wonder what she was. I wonder if she meant something, or if she was connected to the room, the house, or maybe even to what I was feeling that night. I don't know. I only know what I saw. And even after all these years, I still can't fully explain the little girl who stood beside my bed. I know this is going to sound strange, and honestly, it still feels strange saying it out loud. For years, only a handful of people have known about it. A couple of close friends, my former wife, and the person I'm with now. That's it. This happened back in January of 2004. I was 19, maybe a few weeks past my birthday, and I was driving home from my girlfriend's place very early in the morning. She lived in this older, kind of charming pocket of a town outside Providence, Rhode Island. The rest of the area was mostly the usual suburban sprawl, shopping plazas, chain restaurants, long roads that all seemed to lead nowhere in particular. But her neighborhood had a little history to it, a little character. At the time, I was driving a dark red Oldsmobile sedan. It was my first car, and my dad had helped me get it. I think he saw it as this big, sturdy, harmless old man car, something safe for a teenager. What he did not seem to realize was that the thing had a lot more power under the hood than it looked like it should. Getting to the highway from that town was always a chore. You had to pass through miles of lights, strip malls, subdivisions, and empty parking lots before you finally reached the ramp. I remember the exact time I got there because I had just turned up the radio and glanced at the clock. It was 1:42 a.m. A couple days earlier, we'd had one of those messy New England winter storms. Not a huge one, just enough freezing rain, sleet, and snow to make everything irritating. Most of the roads were fine by then, but there were still patches of ice in shaded areas, especially on bridges and side streets. The kind of thing you don't see until it has already found you. I had taken that on-ramp countless times. I knew the curve. I knew how it felt. So I probably got too comfortable, and I accelerated faster than I should have. Then the tires just let go. Anyone who has ever hit black ice knows that awful floating feeling, like the road has suddenly stopped belonging to you. The car started spinning across the ramp toward the guardrail, and beyond that guardrail was a drop down to the road below, maybe 20 or 30 feet. Enough that I knew, very clearly, this was not going to be a little fender bender. I remember facing the guardrail straight on, and then everything stopped. Not slowed down, not became blurry, stopped. It was like someone had pressed pause on the entire world. The car was frozen in place. There was no sound from outside, no wind, no tires, no engine noise that I can remember. Nothing moved. The only thing I could hear was myself breathing. Then this light appeared inside the car. It was faint at first, kind of peach-colored, almost coral, and it didn't seem to be coming from any one place. It was just there, filling the air around me. And then I heard a voice. I still don't really know how to describe it. It wasn't human, but it also wasn't frightening in the way you'd expect. The closest description I've ever come up with is that it sounded like a musical instrument trying to speak. Like a glass xylophone, maybe. Clear, bright, gentle, completely unnatural, but somehow calm. It said, "Jonah, take your hands off the steering wheel." That was all. It sounded like it was right beside my right ear. Until that moment, I hadn't even realized how tightly I was gripping the wheel. My hands actually hurt. But I did exactly what it said. I let go. And then everything went black. The next thing I remember, I opened my eyes and I was several miles down the highway. The car was parked perfectly in the breakdown lane, as neat as if I had pulled over myself. The first thing I saw was the dashboard clock glowing in the dark. It was 1:57 a.m., so about 15 minutes were just gone. I got out, stumbling a little, completely confused. I walked around the car, expecting damage. Scrapes, dents, something. There was nothing. Not a mark. I didn't know what else to do. There was no one around, no explanation waiting for me on the side of the road. So I got back in, drove the rest of the way home, put the car in the garage, and went to bed. And that was it. I didn't tell many people. I waited years before I told a couple of close friends. Later, I told my wife when we had been dating for a while. More recently, I told my current partner. I have never had anything like that happen again. Nothing paranormal, nothing unexplained, nothing even close. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't on anything. I wasn't exhausted. I don't have any history of hallucinations or mental illness. I've always thought of myself as a pretty grounded, rational person. But that happened. And even now, more than 20 years later, I can still remember that strange, beautiful voice. Whatever it was, I think it saved my life. This usually happened on nights when my mom would leave dinner out for my dad. Back then, he had a habit of going out for a drink and coming home really late. Sometimes the whole house would already be asleep by the time he got back. And that's when this thing, whatever it was, seemed to have its own little routine. I know that sounds strange, but it really did feel like a routine. You'd hear someone in the kitchen serving themselves food. Plates shifting, utensils moving. The soft clink of dishes, like someone was making themselves comfortable at the table. Then, after a while, you'd hear the sink turn on, dishes being washed, and cabinets opening and closing like everything was being put away. It happened so many times that eventually I told my mom. We talked about it, but honestly, we mostly just brushed it off. What else were we supposed to do? It wasn't loud enough to feel threatening, but it was clear enough that you couldn't pretend it was nothing. This went on for years, maybe 2 years, maybe longer. Then one day, it just stopped. I don't usually like reading too much into things, but over the last decade, my dad became more religious. Just him, though. He never pushed it on the rest of us. I do remember him bringing holy water into the house at one point, and now I wonder if maybe he saw something one of those nights. Maybe he knew more than he said. But I did see something myself around that time. One night, I was coming down from the second floor to use the main bathroom on the first floor. I had a flashlight with me, and I remember pointing it down the stairs. From that angle, you could see straight toward the kitchen sink. And standing right there, in front of the sink, was a shadow figure. It didn't move. It didn't turn around. It was just there. I didn't scream. I didn't wake anyone up. I just ran right back to my bed and stayed there. Everyone else was asleep, and I remember lying there trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I had definitely seen. That wasn't the only strange thing happening back then either. Before that, there had been weird shadows on the laundry room wall. Not people-shaped exactly, not really like figures, just strange movements that didn't make sense. It sounds silly when I say it out loud, but at the time, it felt wrong. There were other things in that house too. Little pebbles would hit our bedroom window, almost like someone was throwing them from my grandma's house next door. Plates moved across the dining table once when I was about to make cereal. I heard my mom call my name when she hadn't called me at all. And then, just like the dinner sounds, all of it stopped. The only time in recent years that I heard someone call me like that again was in the days after my grandpa passed away last December. That one felt different though. Sadder. Softer. I've had other experiences since then, but not in that house. The newer ones have happened where I live now. I want to tell you about something that happened to me last October, a few nights before Halloween. I was home alone that evening. My parents had gone out of town to stay with relatives, and they left me in the house by myself. I should probably say right away that the house had always felt a little strange to me. Not in a dramatic way at first, just small things. A book left on one table would turn up on another. Cabinet doors would be open when I knew I had shut them. But the thing that truly bothered me was the old piano in the front room. Sometimes, late at night, it would play on its own. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like something people say when they want attention. But I heard it more than once. Soft notes, slow, careful, almost sad. And whenever it happened, I would sometimes see this pale haze gathering near the back of the piano, almost like smoke, except there was no fire. There was always a smell too, sweet, heavy, old, like church incense mixed with dried flowers. That night, I didn't want to be alone with all of that, so I invited a few friends over. There was Henrik, Victor, Zoya, and Olivia. Nothing big, just snacks, drinks, talking, trying to turn the house into something normal for a few hours. Zoya was always the one who loved ghost stories and paranormal things. She showed up with a spirit board tucked under her arm and said we should try it. I laughed at first. We all did. It felt harmless. It felt like a Halloween joke. So we sat in the living room, right in front of the piano. Zoya spread the board out on the floor, and I placed an upside-down glass in the middle to use as the pointer. I had made a plate of sandwiches, and everyone kept reaching for them like eating would make the whole thing less serious. Then Zoya put her fingers on the glass and told us to do the same. Her voice got very quiet. She asked, "Is anyone here with us?" For a while, nothing happened. We just sat there, feeling silly. Then Zoya's face changed. She whispered that she could smell lavender. Not fresh lavender, old lavender, like something pressed between the pages of a book. Then she said she felt someone standing behind the piano. That was when the room started to feel colder. Not just chilly, heavy, close, like the air had thickened around us. And then the glass moved. It slid slowly across the board and stopped on no. Nobody spoke for a moment. Zoya swallowed and asked, "What is your name?" The glass moved again, letter by letter. Miss Elena. I remember looking at everyone's faces and realizing we were all thinking the same thing. This didn't feel funny anymore. Zoya asked, "What are you doing here?" The glass moved. "I am playing Chopin." That answer made my stomach turn, because the piano had played by itself before, and the music always had that same mournful, classical sound. Zoya kept going, even though I wanted her to stop. "Why are you here?" The glass answered, "Grace and obedience." That made no sense to us, but somehow it felt worse than if it had said something frightening. Then Zoya asked, "What do you look like?" The glass didn't spell anything this time. It started moving in circles, then faster, then in figure eights, over and over, dragging our fingers with it. The room felt wrong, completely wrong. I remember the smell getting stronger, that dry lavender and incense scent, and I could hear the faintest sound from the piano, like one key being pressed very gently. Zoya suddenly pulled in a breath and said, "We're done." She forced the glass over to "goodbye," flipped it upright, and took it off the board. We tried to act normal after that. We lit candles. Someone made a joke. I burned incense because I thought maybe it would clear the air, or at least make us feel better. But nobody really relaxed. Eventually, everyone left. And the second I shut the front door, the knocking started. It came from inside the walls. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. The piano began playing again. Not loud, not wild, just those same slow notes drifting through the dark house. The lights flickered in the hallway, and even though I couldn't see the mist anymore, the whole place felt heavier than it had before, like something had stayed behind after we told it to leave. I barely slept that night. When I did, I had terrible dreams. In every one of them, I was in the living room, and someone was standing behind the piano, waiting for me to turn around. The next morning, I opened every window in the house. I lit more incense. I walked outside for almost an hour just to get away from the feeling. When I came back, the house was quiet. But Zoya was different after that night. At first, it was small. She seemed distracted, tired. She would stare past people when they spoke to her. Then she started saying things that made no sense. She said she was Miss Alina. She said she had lived in the 1800s. She said the piano had called her because she had been chosen. And I know this is the part that sounds impossible. But from that night on, wherever Zoya went, there was always that same smell around her. Dried lavender. Faint, but always there. I want to tell you about my brother, because he was one of those people who didn't just enjoy ghost stories. He actually went out looking for them. He had this little paranormal crew with a few of his friends. They called themselves the Paxton Paranormal Society. He even made a handful of short movies with them. Nothing famous or flashy, just local stuff they showed at the old downtown theater. But he took it seriously. One story he told me always stuck with me. He and one of his friends went out to the oldest cemetery in our town one night. It was called White Pine Cemetery, and it had been there forever. Some of the first settlers were buried there, and everybody in town had heard the same rumor growing up, that a witch was buried somewhere on the grounds. So they pulled in, parked by the old gravel path, and started unloading their equipment from the car. That was when they heard something moving fast in the woods. Not a little branch snap, not a raccoon, something running. They turned toward the sound, and that's when they saw it. A circle of candles burning in the dark. Right in the middle of the circle was a black robe, just lying there on the ground. My brother picked it up, which I personally think was a terrible idea, but that was very much his style. And to make it worse, this cemetery already had a reputation. There had been several reports of strange rituals happening out there over the years. It got bad enough that police started patrolling the place at night. Then, while they were still trying to figure out what they were looking at, they saw a pale figure deeper in the woods. It moved between the trees, almost like it was running, and then it was just gone. My brother claimed they weren't scared. He said they were mostly confused. I do not believe him for 1 second. But somehow, instead of leaving like normal people, they decided to keep going. They set up their cameras, a voice recorder that he swore could pick up something as tiny as a piece of candy hitting the ground from across the room, a spirit box, and one of those laser grids that throws little green dots everywhere. I never fully understood what that thing was supposed to prove, but it looked creepy enough doing it. Then they turned on the spirit box. Almost right away, a voice came through. It said, "Satanic." Then it said there were people watching them. They had planned to stay for 2 hours, but after that, they barely made it 1. The whole place felt wrong, and even my brother, who loved this kind of thing, knew when to stop pushing his luck. As they were driving out down that long gravel road, his friend suddenly looked toward the woods and said he saw 3 people sitting among the trees. All 3 of them were wearing robes. My brother had plenty more stories like that, and honestly, some of them are even stranger. But that was the first one that really made me wonder whether he was chasing ghosts, or whether something out there had started chasing him back. I'm 36 now, and not long ago, I went to Auschwitz for the first time. It wasn't a place I had ever really wanted to visit, not because I didn't think it mattered, but because I knew it mattered so much. My father had wanted to go for years, though, so we planned a long weekend in Krakow and made the trip together. Before we went, I had read plenty about Auschwitz. People talked about the silence there, the heaviness in the air, the strange absence of birds, that feeling that grief itself had settled into the ground. But when we arrived, it wasn't like that for me. The sky was clear, the sun was out, birds were singing, people were walking quietly from place to place, and somehow, at first, it felt almost ordinary. Bricks, fences, paths, old buildings. I knew what had happened there. I saw the photographs, the piles of shoes, the suitcases, the hair, the personal things that once belonged to people with whole lives behind them. It was deeply sad. Of course it was. But I still felt strangely separate from it, almost like there was a pane of glass between me and the reality of it. I understood it in my head, but I couldn't seem to feel it in my body. Then we reached Block 11. Our guide didn't explain much before we went inside. We just walked in, and the moment I crossed that threshold, something changed. It was immediate. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My chest tightened. I felt this rush of adrenaline so strong it was almost physical, like my whole body had suddenly decided I was in danger. There was no thought behind it at first, just instinct. Everything in me was saying, "Get out, leave now." I've never felt anything quite like it. By the time we reached the basement, that feeling had become overwhelming. It was as if the air had been emptied of hope. I don't know how else to describe it. My legs were unsteady, my hands felt strange, and there was this awful pressure inside me, like my body knew something before my mind had caught up. When we finally came back out and stepped into the courtyard, I was shaking. I felt sick, shaken, and completely exposed. Only then did I fully understand where we were. Block 11 was the punishment block, the place of torture and executions. The courtyard outside holds the death wall. I'm not going to describe what happened there in detail. It doesn't feel right for me to do that casually. Afterward, the feeling faded. I went back to that same detached sadness I'd felt earlier. I could look at the buildings again and think, this is history now. These are bricks. These are walls. Horrific, yes. Devastating, yes. But distant. Except Block 11 didn't feel distant. That place felt present. I'm not usually someone who claims to sense things. I enjoy paranormal stories and strange accounts, but I've never been the person who sees something in a corner or feels a ghost in a room. I'm not built that way, or at least I didn't think I was. But what happened in that building has stayed with me. The closest way I can explain it is that something deep inside me recognized evil there. Not imagined it, not dramatized it, but recognized it. My body reacted before I had any words for it, and every part of me wanted to escape. Since that visit, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. It feels, in a way I know sounds strange, like I left some part of myself down in that basement. Auschwitz Memorial is extraordinary. It is handled with care, respect, and seriousness. The guides are excellent, and I believe it's an experience I'll never forget. But Block 11 affected me in a way I still don't fully understand. And I keep wondering whether anyone else has ever walked into that building and felt the same thing. I've felt for a long time that something has been watching over me. Protecting me, maybe. I don't know exactly what to call it, but the feeling has been there since I was a teenager. I've always had this intense intuition about people. I can usually sense someone's real intentions before they show them, even when everyone else is convinced they're harmless. And it isn't just a vague feeling. I've had dreams that later turned out to be true in very specific ways. I've dreamed about betrayal, about things happening behind my back, and then later found out the details were exactly right. Because of that, I've stopped obsessing over revenge. It's strange to say, but when someone seriously hurts me, it often feels like life catches up with them on its own. There was one situation with a former landlord who had been secretly recording me through holes in the wall. After I moved out, he tried to blackmail me. Eventually, he was arrested, and the police discovered there had been many other victims over many years. I prayed that he would never be able to hurt anyone like that again. A few days later, I got a call from the victim advocate telling me he had died. Something similar happened with a man in my family, someone I never really knew personally. He had caused terrible harm to my mother and her siblings when they were children. He went to prison for it, and after he was released, I found out he had hurt another child. I was furious and heartbroken. I prayed again that he would never be able to harm anyone else. Not long after, my mother told me he had died too. I don't say any of this lightly. It scares me a little. It makes me wonder what's around me, what hears me, and what kind of protection this really is. More recently, my husband and I were having a very painful argument. Every time he started saying something that really hurt me, the light beside him began flickering. There were other lights on in the room, but only that one reacted. It happened several times. The last time it flickered so intensely that he stopped, looked shaken, and apologized. He told me he loved me, that he didn't want to hurt me, and that he didn't want to keep arguing. As soon as he apologized, the light stopped. He later told me it felt like a warning, and he didn't think it was a coincidence. Another time, a strange and completely false rumor was going around about us. We were trying to figure out who started it, and I was convinced it had to be one of two people who didn't like us. Then suddenly, I got this overwhelming feeling through my whole body, chills and heat all at once, and I just knew it was my mother-in-law. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind before that moment. I told my husband, "No, it wasn't them. I know it was your mom." He didn't believe me at first, but when he called her, it turned out I was right. I had a very rough childhood and a difficult stretch through my teens and early 20s. I've heard people say that sometimes those who go through a lot are protected in ways they don't fully understand. Now I'm married and I'm a mother, and I've noticed strange things around my child too. Not scary things, more like a loving, protective presence. It feels like whatever this is, it loves her too. When I was around 22, I briefly tried learning about witchcraft. I didn't go very deep into it, but I felt strongly drawn to Hecate. I learned a little about her, and even now I still think about her sometimes. There's a strange connection there that I can't really explain. At the same time, I was raised Christian. I drifted away for a while when I was younger, but lately I've been trying to come back to my faith. So now I'm left wondering what this could be. Is it Hecate? Is it an angel? A family member who passed away? Something darker? I truly don't know. All I know is that something feels present. Something feels aware of me. For a long time, my husband didn't believe me when I told him that. But after what he's seen, even he believes there may be something there. And I guess I'm sharing this because I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what this is, but I know what I've felt, and I know I'm not imagining all of it. I've had a few moments in my life that I honestly still don't know how to explain. I'm not someone who walks around claiming I have all these answers about the other side, or spirits, or anything like that. Most of the time, I'm not even sure what I believe. Some days I feel like I believe in nothing at all. But every once in a while, information just sort of arrives in my mind. Not like a normal thought, not like a guess. It feels different. It comes with this pressure, almost like I'm supposed to say something, and the longer I ignore it, the heavier it gets. One time, years ago, I was at an eye appointment, and out of nowhere I got this feeling that I needed to tell the optometrist something. It was about a dark-haired man and a woman who was sorry she had missed the optometrist's birthday. That was basically the whole message. Just hello and sorry about the birthday. And I felt ridiculous. I remember sitting there thinking, absolutely not. I am not about to bother this educated doctor with some psychic TV show nonsense. But the pressure kept building until I couldn't stand it anymore. So I apologized first because I was so embarrassed, and then I said, I'm really sorry if this sounds strange, but I feel like I'm supposed to tell you something. When I told her, she started crying. She said her father and her aunt had both passed away recently. Her aunt's birthday had always been close to hers, and they used to celebrate together every year. They exchanged cards, made a little tradition of it. So that message, as odd as it sounded to me, meant something very real to her. That wasn't the only time something like that happened. Not often, but a few times. I'd get one of those messages, pass it along, and the person would understand it. Usually they got emotional, so I don't think they were just pretending. But the warning about the deer felt different, because it was only for me. This was probably 16 years ago. I was in my early 20s, living in the northeastern United States. One night, I was driving home from my boyfriend's place. It was only about 4 or 5 miles, but the road was dark, wooded, familiar, and full of sharp twists. And just to be clear, I hadn't been drinking or using anything. I was completely sober. As I was driving, I suddenly knew there was going to be a deer in the road. Not just somewhere vague. I knew exactly where. It would be right after this small bridge, around a sharp curve. I could almost see it in my mind, standing there in the road. And I kept questioning myself, because that's what I do. I thought, there are woods everywhere. Of course there could be a deer anywhere. But the place I was seeing didn't really make sense. That bridge goes over a wide creek, and the road there is steep and awkward. On one side, there's barely any shoulder before the ground drops sharply down toward the water. On the other side, there's this steep hill that rises almost straight up, with an old inn sitting above it. For a deer to be standing where I knew it would be, it would have had to come down the road somehow after getting past the guardrail. Not impossible, but strange. The closer I got, the stronger the warning became. By the time I reached the bridge and started around that bend, my whole body was on alert. I slowed down before I even saw anything. From outside the car, I probably would have looked calm. Inside, my heart was pounding. And then, there it was. The deer was standing exactly where I had seen it. I didn't see it step into the road. I didn't slam on the brakes. I didn't almost hit it. I had slowed down so much that I simply stopped a few yards away, like I had arrived at a place I'd already been told about. For a moment, we just stayed there, me in the car and the deer in the road, looking at each other in the dark. Then it slowly walked around the front of my car, passed by, and disappeared around the corner. I think I started crying after that. I remember saying thank you, even though I had no idea who I was thanking. Then I drove the rest of the way home, which was less than a mile. The reason I'm thinking about it again is because something similar happened tonight. This time I was in the car with my best friend. He was driving, and he's a total skeptic. He doesn't really believe in anything like this. The feeling wasn't as clear as it had been all those years ago. It wasn't a detailed image exactly. It was more like pressure, a sense that we were getting close to something. I almost didn't say anything, but finally I told him to watch for a deer. And not long after, there it was, standing there and staring at us. Later, I asked him why he thinks things like this have happened to me. I made it clear that tonight wasn't as specific as the old warning, but it reminded me of it. He said there are deer in the area, so it was probably just a coincidence. And I understand that logically. I really do. Deer do live around here. Sometimes a warning is just your brain noticing patterns before you consciously understand them. But that old night still bothers me, because it wasn't just a feeling that a deer might be nearby. It was specific. I knew the curve. I knew the place. I slowed down before I could see anything, and the deer was exactly there. My friend also said that if the deer hadn't appeared, I probably would have forgotten the feeling. That's not a terrible point, but it isn't completely true either. I do remember at least one time when I had a bad feeling and nothing seemed to happen afterward. I don't treat these moments like proof of anything. I don't take them lightly. So I don't know. Maybe my friend is right, and it's all coincidence. Maybe my brain is doing something I don't understand. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation hiding under all of it. But I also know what it felt like that night. And I know the deer was there. I've always loved watching paranormal shows, especially the ones that feel like you're sitting in the dark with your friends, half laughing and half regretting every choice that led you there. For me, BuzzFeed Unsolved was exactly that. My friends and I used to watch the spooky episodes together whenever we wanted to scare ourselves a little. But there was one episode that stayed with me in a different way. It was the one about Hannah Willows. And I don't know how to explain it, but while I was watching it, it stopped feeling like entertainment. It started feeling uncomfortably close to something I had already lived through. So, for some background, I was born and raised in Chile, but my family is Japanese. And growing up, my mom would sometimes tell me about strange things she experienced when she was young. She would say it so casually, too, like she was talking about the weather. She'd mention seeing a pale woman or feeling like something was watching her. And when she told her mother about it, they took her to several spiritual readers. 3 of them, actually. The strange part is that they all supposedly said the same thing. They said there was a woman attached to my mom. A woman who had drowned during a tsunami. There was even a story in my family that this woman was supposed to marry my grandfather before he met my grandmother. And after she died, she never really let go of that bitterness. I know that sounds dramatic. It sounds like something written for a movie. But in my family, it was never told that way. It was just treated like something that happened. But the thing that stayed with me most wasn't my mom's story. It was mine. When I was about 6 years old, around 2009, we lived in an apartment that never felt right to me. I was just a kid, so I didn't have the words for it then, but I remember feeling like the place was heavy somehow, like the air had corners. At night, I would sometimes wake up because it felt like someone was touching my hair. Not pulling it, not hurting me, just gently moving it, almost like someone was brushing it away from my face. My mom had her own experiences too. She would hear knocking on her bedroom door and assume it was me because I hated sleeping alone back then. But whenever she opened the door, there was nobody there. And then one night, something happened that I've never been able to forget. I woke up because I was cold. At first, I was still half asleep, just confused. Then I realized my blanket was completely off me. Not like it had slipped down while I was sleeping. It looked like it had been pulled away. I turned my head toward the closet, and that's when I saw her. There was a little girl standing there. She looked about my age. Very pale skin, soft, curly blonde hair, almost like she could have been from somewhere in Europe. But it wasn't her appearance that disturbed me. It was her face. She looked angry. Not blank, not sad. Angry. Like she was furious with me for something I didn't understand. And the strangest part is that I wasn't scared. I just looked at her, quietly, calmly. Like some part of me thought this was normal, even though it absolutely wasn't. That's the part that bothers me now. I feel like I should have screamed. I should have run to my mom. I should have done anything except lie there and stare back. But I didn't. I just watched her until the moment passed. Years later, when I saw that episode about Hannah Willows, they mentioned how some entities can appear as children because children seem less threatening. And that sentence stayed with me. It made me wonder what I had actually seen that night. Was it really a little girl? Or was it something else wearing the shape of one? The other strange thing is that everything seemed to stop after my dad moved out. My parents divorced when I was 9, and after that, nothing like that ever happened again. Around that same time, my dog passed away. Something odd happened after that too, but it felt completely different. It didn't feel angry. It didn't feel dark. It was more gentle, more confusing than frightening. Like it belonged to a separate story entirely. Then, in 2023, we were having dinner with my dad's side of the family, and out of nowhere, my dad mentioned that his apartment felt haunted. He was living in another unit in the same apartment complex we had lived in when I was little. He started talking about small things that had been happening. A kitchen light swinging by itself. Drawers being open when he knew he had closed them. Socks disappearing. Little things, yes, but enough of them that he was clearly uneasy. He even said he tried lighting candles to cleanse the place, but the flames would flicker wildly for no reason. And then he admitted he was scared. That was when I finally told him what I had seen as a child. And after I said it out loud, something clicked for me. I started wondering if maybe it had never been the apartment. Maybe it was connected to him. My grandmother on his side has always been very involved in witchcraft and spiritual practices. Not in a casual way either. She took it seriously. So part of me wonders if something, whether intentional or accidental, attached itself somewhere along the line. I still don't know what I believe. I'm not saying I know it was supernatural. I'm not saying I have proof. But when I look at all the pieces together, it's hard to dismiss it completely. The episode that brought all of this back was The Haunting of Hannah Willows, from BuzzFeed Unsolved Supernatural, Season 5, Episode 6. Watching it made me realize something. You can move on from things like this. You can grow up, leave the apartment, stop talking about it, and convince yourself it's over. But it doesn't fully leave. It waits quietly in the back of your mind. And then one day, something reminds you. Last night, around 2:30 in the morning, my younger cousin called me and told me to get my mom over to my aunt's house because something had happened. A few minutes later, my little cousin FaceTimed us, and I saw my cousin, who I'll call Andy, being held down by my aunt and uncle while they prayed over her. Everyone was crying. Andy was trying to curl into herself, but at the same time, her neck was stretched back, and she was making these awful sounds while she cried. For a second, I thought about recording it, just to have proof, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. It felt wrong. My whole family was scared and heartbroken, and it just didn't seem respectful. The hardest part is that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. About a year ago, Andy went to Mexico to stay with family. My relatives there are very Catholic, and one of my aunts is known in their town for having strange dreams and sensing things other people can't. People sometimes go to her when they think something paranormal is happening. During Andy's first week there, something happened that made my family believe she might have been possessed. She was in a room with relatives who were praying, and out of nowhere, she turned toward my grandfather and started cursing at him. She became aggressive and violent, and my aunt and uncle had to stop her before she could hurt anyone. They ended up holding her down while she said terrible things about God and their faith. She was speaking in a language nobody understood, and the whole thing lasted around 20 minutes. Eventually, after they kept praying over her, she slowly calmed down. Afterward, my aunt told us that Andy had said whatever was inside her would not leave as long as she kept living with her mother. Andy has trauma connected to her mom, and according to my aunt, this thing was feeding off that pain. She said it would keep getting stronger as long as Andy stayed in that situation. From Andy's side, she said she remembered closing her eyes, then opening them again, and seeing the family standing over her, praying. She said she could feel her mouth moving, but she couldn't understand what she was saying. Sometimes she could hear herself and everyone else, and other times it was like everything went silent. She kept slipping in and out like that until it was over. After Mexico, she could barely be alone anymore. Even before that, she had always seen and heard things, but after that experience, my family felt like it confirmed something was attached to her. At first, we thought their house was haunted. Doors would open by themselves, lights would turn on and off. People would hear voices when only one person was home. Things would fall or move for no reason. But then they moved, and the same things kept happening. That's when I started thinking maybe it was never the house. Maybe it was connected to Andy. I've experienced things myself while staying with them. In their old house, Andy and I would stay up late talking until 3 or 4 in the morning, and we'd hear something fall inside the closet, knocking on the door, or footsteps in the attic. In their new house, it felt worse. I stayed there for about a month, and I saw a shadow pass by when I was alone. I heard voices behind me while I was in the bathroom. At night, Andy and I would hear my aunt's voice when she wasn't there, footsteps in the kitchen, and things falling in the living room. One time, my cousin, who I'll call Freddie, didn't believe any of it. I think he was in denial more than anything. My aunt and uncle were away on a work trip, and at around 3 in the morning, the TV suddenly turned on by itself. It was blasting at full volume, playing a children's cartoon. We were too scared to go turn it off, so we called Freddie and asked him to do it. He agreed, but the second he stepped into the living room, he said the whole room felt freezing cold. He felt like someone was watching him. He turned the TV off as fast as he could and went straight back to his room. There are more stories, but that's the general picture. Lately, I've been trying to understand what might be happening to Andy. I found a video online last month that really reminded me of her situation, but I can't share the link here. What worries me most is that whatever this is seems to get worse whenever she's sad or overwhelmed. She has intense emotions. She's constantly getting hurt or ending up in the hospital for different reasons. Money never seems to stay with her, and she often complains about back pain when she's stressed. I know there could be a medical explanation. Maybe there's something psychological going on. Maybe my family and I are scared and connecting things that aren't connected. Maybe it's something like collective panic or trauma or something we don't understand yet. But after seeing what I saw, it's hard not to feel like there's something more happening. So I'm asking sincerely, has anyone heard of anything like this? Does anyone know what this could be, or what kind of help we should look for? My mom went to my aunt's house because she has experience with situations like this, and they called her hoping she could help. I'm still awake, still shaken up, and still trying to figure out what we're supposed to do next.